By this time, at the end of the Carboniferous period, vegetation was already becoming abundant. There were many specimens of the Phyllocophyte family, ferns and trees of various sizes. There was also an explosion of seed plants and conifers. This is the landscape you're looking at, which once fossilized many years later, gave rise to the coal deposits. Hard coal is a sedimentary, carbonaceous rock that corresponds to a specific grade of coal. Blackish in color, it comes from the carbonization of plant organisms. It is for this reason that the period is known as the Carboniferous. These large deposits of charcoal are due to the appearance of trees with bark, and in particular, those with woody bark, but also to the spread of vast swamps and forests in North America and Eurasia. The formation of these swamps was undoubtedly favored by very low sea levels. Large trees can be seen here, including lepidodendrons up to 40 meters or 130 feet high, which belong to the arborescent Lycophyte family, calamites around 10 meters or 30 feet high, which closely resemble the horsetails we know today, Sigillaria, Neuropterus, and of course tree ferns such as Sphenopterus. A few meters away, another large tree takes up a lot of space. This is a Glossopteridium. It's a deciduous plant. It could reach 30 meters or 100 feet in height. This tree tells us a great deal about the climate of the time. In fact, the wood of its trunk and branches shows rings, suggesting that the climate at the time had distinct seasons. The tree's reproductive apparatus, the kind of fruit you can see at the end of the branch, is called Dictyopteridium in this species. It looks a bit like a half-open pea pod. Inside, this pod-shaped leaf houses the plant's ovules. For the operation to work and give birth to a new tree, the pollen grain, the microsporangium found at the edge of the male fertile leaves in these small clusters, must find its way to the ovules. The male reproductive system is called eretmonia. A little further on, you can see a sister group of conifers that could be called primitive conifers or archaic conifers. These are Chordaetes lungatus. Chordaeatalis leaves resemble long ribbons with parallel veins that can occasionally dichotomize, i.e. split in two. There's also a whole family of pteridospermales in abundance here and there, made up of the so-called seed ferns. Sphenopterus, which we saw earlier, belongs to this group. The frond of this type of fern could reach almost 50 centimeters or 20 inches in length. As you can imagine, all this vegetation was home to many animal species. For the moment, they've remained fairly discreet, but believe me, given the size of some of them, we're not likely to miss them. Come on, follow me. We're going to retrace our steps a little and get a little closer to this marshy body of water. It's the perfect time to talk about the rising waters. This event lasted millions of years and began just before the beginning of the Carboniferous period, towards the end of the Devonian. This gradual adaptation of fauna from an aquatic to a terrestrial environment is a key stage in the evolution of living organisms. Appearing during the Devonian, the stegocephalon fish, Ichthyostega, is an important evolutionary element. It is the missing link between crossopterygian fish and amphibians, its body is much better adapted to combat gravity. Because on land everything changes, as water no longer plays the role of lift. Musculature and bone structure are strengthened. This enables these animals to move more easily, without expending considerable energy to do so. But these are not the only criteria that have evolved. Unlike Elginerpeton penshini or Abrachovectus gracilis, both of which are also stegocephales, Ichthyostega is much better adapted to life on land. It's a tetrapodomorph, a primitive tetrapod of sorts. Its four limbs are clearly visible. Scientists assume that its tail was used for swimming. Its legs, mainly the front ones, could have been used on land. We have here one of the first vertebrate specimens to have ventured onto land. According to the latest investigations, it would have moved around, like pinnipeds, sea lions, or seals, for example. What you can't see, however, is the way it breathes. It has lungs, but it also uses gills to evacuate carbon dioxide. Its respiratory system is a perfect in-between, half aquatic and half terrestrial. Thanks to these new abilities, these primitive amphibians can covet new territories, especially wetlands. Bodies of water serve mainly as breeding grounds, but are no longer their living environment outside the mating season. Over millions of years, thanks to abundant nature and lush vegetation, animals have been able to get along, develop, and multiply. Winged insects, millipedes, spiders, scorpions, amphibians, and reptiles lived among horsetails, giant ferns, and the first conifers. The Carboniferous forest is teeming with life. And yet, paradoxical as it may seem, very few of these vertebrates and invertebrates are vegetarians. That's right. This diet was not yet on the menu of the species that populated the Earth's soil at that time. And let me warn you, this is far from being their only particularity. The Carboniferous, it's the age of giants. Indeed, that's one of the other important facts to note about this period. If the Jurassic and Cretaceous eras are known for being lands of giants, home to colossal dinosaurs, the Carboniferous also has some extraordinarily large specimens to its credit. Just look at the imposing size of these primitive insects. Here's Stenodictia, a primitive flying insect measuring around 9 centimeters or 3.5 inches. Another member of the Paleodictyoptera family is Dunbarria falcipennis. As you can see, the cerci, the appendages located on the rear segment of the animal, are also very long compared to the rest of the body. They are sometimes twice as long as the length of the abdomen. In our Dunbarria, these appendages were probably sensory organs, but for some, they are also a pincer weapon, or a reproductive organ. Although this specimen is rather generous in size, it is far from reaching the measurements of the giant dragonfly, Meganeura moniae, with its 70-centimeter or 28-inch wingspan. While its size is impressive, it doesn't weigh much considering the width of its wings, barely 150 grams. As you can see, it likes wetlands. She lives close to rivers and bodies of water, like this vast expanse of marshland. Meganeura is a super predator. She hunts in flight and can perform some feats thanks to her efficient wings, perfect for rapid changes of direction. What's more, she has 360-degree vision. No prey escapes her piercing vision. Last but not least, it also has strong spiny legs. This enables it to seize its prey with great ease. This dragonfly is not the only one to boast vertiginous dimensions for insects. Carboniferous millipedes are equally impressive. Here, it's a Acanther pestes. It measures around 50 centimeters or 20 inches. That's already impressive for an animal of this kind, at least according to our current image. However, Arthropleura beats these records by a wide margin, with a length of almost 1.5 meters or 5 feet. This Arthropleura, armata, can even reach 2.5 meters or 8 feet, weighing around 50 kilograms or 110 pounds. It's one of the largest terrestrial invertebrates ever discovered. Fortunately for us, the animal is a herbivore, but that doesn't stop it from being impressively charismatic. Its flattened body was made up of 30 articulated segments. Each was covered by 2 side plates, but also by a central plate. Another species equally impressive for its size is Megarachne cervini. This is a member of the Eurypterid family, mostly aquatic animals that have been nicknamed sea scorpions. But this specimen is a bit special. It's one of the rare terrestrial Eurypterid species. Megarachne cervini resembles a spider. This primitive arachnid is quite imposing, the size of a human face, enough to surprise and frighten those who don't take these little beasts as friends. The body is 34 centimeters or 13 inches long, with a distance between the upper legs of up to 60 centimeters or 24 inches. If all these creatures are giants, it's because the environment in which they live lends itself to their dizzying growth. During the Carboniferous period, impressive rainforests covered the planet, trapping carbon and pumping enormous amounts of oxygen into the atmosphere. Since spiders and insects need lots of oxygen to grow, conditions were ideal for them. The Carboniferous gigantism displayed by arthropods, animals with jointed feet and segmented bodies such as the giant centipede, Arthropleura, the giant dragonfly, Meganeura, and also amphibians, can therefore be explained by the high level of oxygen in the air. At the time, it was close to 35% instead of the current 21%. But that's not the only reason. It could also be that the virtual absence of predators and abundance of food favored their dizzying growth. These giant insects and spiders had very few enemies. For the most part, they were at the top of their food chain. But gigantism wasn't limited to these animals. Amphibians also had their own heavyweight category. While we're still in the Carboniferous period, I'd like to introduce you to the first tetrapod amphibians. The warm, humid environment, combined with the wide availability of atmospheric oxygen, contributed to the development of many of these species. Here's one of them. He's waiting patiently for us at the edge of this body of water. He's probably out hunting. Let's not get too close or he'll lose his meal. This is an actinodon. As you can see, it has the appearance of a crocodile. It has a triangular head made of sculpted bones welded together, like today's crocodiles. Nevertheless, it is a member of the amphibian class and the Archaeopoid family. It has a longer prefrontal and a pointed tip. While its head appears quite large, this is not the case with its eyes and nostrils, which form simple little openings on the face. It has a rather stocky, flat shape and averages 80 centimeters in length. If you get a little closer, you'll be able to see its teeth. It's a carnivore with sharp teeth that enable it to seize its prey. Another animal quite similar to this one belongs to the Stegocephalus group. This is the Pederpes. It is, so to speak, an amphibian in the broadest sense, but does not really belong to the group of modern amphibians according to cladistic taxonomy. It inhales air through muscular action, unlike amphibians, which pump air into the lungs through their throat pouches. Like many of the first amphibians to appear during the Carboniferous period, it had a body configuration quite similar to that of today's salamanders. One thing's for sure, it's a tetrapod. It's a vertebrate animal with a skeleton, 2 pairs of limbs, and pulmonary respiration. Tetrapods evolved from tetrapodomorphs, which in turn descended from lobe-finned fish. This is probably why it looks like half a fish. If it weren't for its legs, it might be mistaken for a fish. Its legs confirm that it's not. The feet face forward, so it's perfectly adapted to life on land. However, this does not prevent it from hunting in water and moving easily in an aquatic environment. In fact, its hearing is more developed in water than on land. He probably used this ability to hunt. So much for the terrestrial animals of the Carboniferous. But what about aquatic animals? What animals inhabited the oceans at the dawn of the Panthalassa? Here too, we can say that fauna and flora are developing, diversifying, and becoming increasingly rich on both sides of this vast expanse of salt water. Nature is very recent on land in the Carboniferous period, but it has long been established in the ocean. Nature is luxuriant on the seabed, and many species have flourished. Over millions of years, corals have expanded and diversified. They have managed to form extensive reefs, particularly in warm waters. Not far from these corals, which provide an ideal natural habitat, animals have taken up residence. Some of them, thanks to their stalks, have managed to cling firmly to the ground. Here you can see yellow blastoids, Orophocrinis, and red crinoids. Both belong to the echinoderm family. You're already familiar with this family, as you've probably met a few of its members without even knowing it. Echinoderms are the family of sea urchins and starfish, for example. These animals have an internal skeleton made up of calcite crystals. These calcite crystals may be organized in a light but resistant network in the animal's tissues, or, as in sea urchins, in calcareous plates, forming a carapace covered with a thin layer of cells. Cradled by ocean currents, our crinoids and blastoids sculpt the reef, providing a privileged environment for a variety of species alongside the corals. You'll come across numerous mollusks of all shapes and sizes. Cephalopods are well represented during this period. Here's one of them, a goniatite. Numerous fossils of these animals can be found today, notably in the Urfaud deposit in Morocco. Goniatites have a rather unusual shell. The chambers are separated by zigzag structures. You're probably wondering what all these chambers are for. You're curious. Your question is an interesting one, and I'm delighted you asked it. The largest of the chambers was the animal's living quarters. The other, smaller chambers were filled with gas. These chambers played a hydrostatic role. There are three main types of skeleton: the endoskeleton, as in humans, the exoskeleton, when outside the animal's body, and the hydroskeleton. The skeleton is made up of cavities filled with fluid, which may be in the form of gas, as in the case of the goniatite. These cavities are surrounded by muscles. The pressure of the fluid and the action of the surrounding muscles will modify the body's shape and produce movement. It can swim or dig. Goniatites had two well-developed eyes and tentacles, but their coiled shell, on a single plane, however aesthetically pleasing, was not an asset for swimming. While we're on the subject of biological discoveries, let's take another look at an animal that belongs to the stegocephalin genus. This is the Ichthyostega. This is a large species around 1.5 meters or 5 feet long, somewhat akin to a fish or salamander. Its skeleton is a little unusual, especially the part of the bones that connect the shoulders and hips to the spinal column. The shoulder girdle and pelvic girdle appear to be strong enough to support a terrestrial lifestyle. As far as shape goes, it looks just like a fish. You can even see, if you get close enough, that it has a tail that allows it to swim easily and fins that help it to navigate. There's no shortage of real fish in the ocean. How would you like to catch a glimpse of one? Let's start with one of the oldest fish we know, the Arandaspis. Although it first appeared in the Ordovician period, it played an important role in the Carboniferous era. It has no jaw, but is surrounded by a carapace. It was therefore probably a filter feeder. It has a streamlined body and measures about 15 centimeters or 6 inches. If you look closely at this fish, you'll understand that it has no fins. To move through the water, it had to use propulsion. Its flattened vertical tail would have played this role. It moves somewhat like a tadpole. This one, the Eusthenopteron, appeared in the Devonian period and lived in both fresh and salt water. Unlike our Arandaspis, the Eusthenopteron was equipped with highly efficient fins. In fact, its posterior fin enabled it to make rapid swings. This ability was useful, not only for escape but also for hunting, as the jawline suggests that this was a predator. Climatius, which also appeared in the Devonian period, is a member of the spiny shark family. It probably lived in schools. Climatius was an active swimmer with a powerful caudal fin and stabilizing fins. It fed on other fish, but also on crustaceans on occasion. Its lower jaw was filled with sharp teeth, which, like those of today's sharks, automatically renew themselves when worn. The upper jaw, on the other hand, was completely toothless. But that doesn't stop it from feeding. Although this fish is a good hunter, it still has to watch its back. On land and at sea, danger is always lurking. This time it's a fearsome predator, the anvil shark, Stethecanthus, which is only a few meters away from this shoal of fish. This is one of the very first cartilaginous fish to have lived on our planet. It too has acclimated perfectly to both salt and fresh waters. Stethecanthus can measure between 70 centimeters or 28 inches and 2 meters or 6.5 feet. One of its special features is its dermal denticles. They may have served as a defense against predators who might have had the crazy idea of attacking such a sea behemoth. It posed a real threat, not only to fish, but also to smaller sharks. It's nicknamed the anvil shark because of its brush-like dorsal fin. This is the animal's second specificity. However, it is only found in males. Scientists are now speculating that this anvil or iron-shaped fin may have something to do with reproduction. Speaking of reproduction, there's another striking phenomenon that took place in the Carboniferous period that we really need to talk about: the appearance of the amniotic egg. It was while studying the Carboniferous period that scientists began to identify the presence of the amniotic egg. Their research and analysis revealed the presence of an amniotic sac, i.e., a sac containing a liquid that protects the embryo or fetus. This is an extraordinary event in the world of living organisms. This phenomenon is a minor revolution in the world of biological evolution. Here's why. Some living creatures begin to emerge from the water and settle on land, but you can't go from an aquatic to a terrestrial environment in the blink of an eye. There are many stages to go through, and major evolutions to conquer. The amniotic egg is just one of them. Why do you think this is? How can the amniotic sac help animals survive on Earth? Well, you see, in an aquatic world, water forms a sort of protective barrier against shocks. But on land, there's nothing to protect the unborn child. The fetus or embryo would be at the mercy of the slightest shock, the slightest collision. No matter how small, it could be fatal. The small amniotic sac, made up of a membrane and a liquid called amnion, protects the embryo from shocks and desiccation. It develops in this aqueous environment amniotic fluid, which is essential to its survival. The next generation develops in the warmth and comfort of a shell, protected from external aggression. We're approaching the end of the Carboniferous period. The animals we've just met may well have witnessed the beginnings of the formation of Pangea. This was the beginning of the collision between Gondwana and Laurentia Baltica, two great continental masses. The collision first took place in the Maritimes on the Laurentia side and in Morocco on the Gondwana side. The latest jolt occurred in the Appalachians. Further west, a piece of ocean was still present. This brings us to the next stage of our journey, the Permian. Here we are, Pangea, a single land, and Panthalassa as far as the eye can see on the horizon. This time, the junction between Euramerica, Asia, and Gondwana really takes shape. During the Permian, it gave rise to the supercontinent we'd been waiting so long to meet. With the exception of part of Southeast Asia, these lands coalesced into a single supercontinent, Pangea. This extended from the equator to the poles and was surrounded by a single ocean, the Panthalassa, or Universal Sea. From the Upper Permian onwards, it was no longer completely alone, as another ocean, the Tethys, opened up across Pangea from east to west. As you can imagine, such geographic changes, such geological upheavals, and such significant terrestrial activity had repercussions on life on Earth. Pangea is subject to great variations in temperature and precipitation, depending on the season and time of day. At the center of Pangea, for example, the temperature could go from 0 to 40 degrees Celsius, or from 32 degrees Fahrenheit to 104 degrees Fahrenheit in the course of a single day. For many species, these changing conditions are difficult to cope with. According to scientists, some of them have evolved to adapt to this difficult climate. Some animals are equipped with a kind of veil, probably thermoregulatory, which enables them to capture the sun's heat in the morning and evacuate it during the day. Most of central Pangea is arid, with high temperatures and little precipitation, but in the polar regions, there is still a glacier that has lasted since the Carboniferous period. Since the collision and this new land formation, you can see that the landscape has evolved. First of all, the landforms. The Appalachians in particular, as well as the Ural Mountains and the Austrian Alps, are higher. This era was also marked by the advance of the sea over the land. Sea levels were low throughout the Permian. This was also the beginning of the invasion of the Triassic Sea. The Hercynian chain began to erode under the effect of the elements, and the major volcanoes of the massive Central ceased their activity. As a domino effect, all these geological upheavals had inevitable impact on living organisms, particularly terrestrial animals. The climate, as we have seen, has been impacted by these many changes. Terrestrial activity is undoubtedly at the root of this climatic upheaval. During the Permian, the climate was much drier and warmer, at least on part of the globe, because as we've just seen, the previous ice age still persisted in the southern hemisphere. These variations in climate and temperature have altered the nature of the plants found in the past. Plants that had been abundant up until now will now be hard hit by the drought and harshness of this new climate. These include giant lycopods and horsetails. Smaller seed ferns replace the larger mottles. Conifers are also on the rise. The change is not radical, of course, but takes shape gradually over time. Vegetation at the beginning of the Permian was quite similar to that of the Carboniferous. We find, for example, Lepidodendron and Sigillaria. Then, however, it was gradually replaced by conifers, such as Walschia in the northern hemisphere, or Glossopteridales, which we observed earlier in our trip. In terms of fauna, the Permian is a paradox. It is as synonymous with the development of life on Earth as it is with mass extinction. In fact, many species will make their debut on the scene, but a large number of them will also become extinct as a result of new environmental constraints. But let's not paint a gloomy picture. While it's true that the Permian is synonymous with the end for many animals, It's also synonymous with life and evolution. Let's discover an emblematic species of this period, the Dimetrodon. There are several species in this family of variable size. To give you an order of magnitude, more than 3 meters or 10 feet separate them from each other. The smallest is about 60 centimeters or 24 inches long. This is the Dimetrodon teutonus, but it's the largest that we're interested in here, the Angolensis Dimetrodon. It measures nearly 4 meters or 13 feet. Its main feature is a veil of elongated neural spines. It forms an extension of the vertebrae. The sail is also made up of soft tissue, probably fed by blood vessels. This particularity of this Dimetrodon would have enabled it to withstand the temperature variations of certain geographical areas during the Permian. Remember that in the course of a single day, particularly in the arid regions of central Pangea, temperatures could go from one extreme to the other in just a few hours. To survive, they had to be able to evacuate heat from their bodies. Other groups of animals gradually developed on Earth. The Permian is notably marked by the presence of reptiles. The egg we mentioned earlier, as well as scales and other new physiological abilities, enabled them, thanks to biological evolution, to gradually carve out a place for themselves on the Earth's soil. We find many synapsids, formerly known as mammalian reptiles, anapsids, periasaurs, as well as pelycosaurs, those famous animals with thermoregulating veils we mentioned earlier. Synapsids are the dominant Permian species. Here's the first of them, Elychinops ornatus. Its name means wolf's face. It measures around 1 meter or 3 feet and weighs around 15 kilos. Its skull is rather long and thin. The fangs in its mouth are quite similar to those of canids. They are located on the upper and lower jaws. It also has sharp-pointed canines, ideal for stabbing prey and tearing flesh. Another synapsid also lived in the Permian. It's called Inostransevia alexandri. It too is a carnivore. Its skeleton is very robust, its skull broad and thick, and its dentition very advanced, with canines that are longer than the other teeth. They could reach 15 centimeters or 6 inches in length. What's more, the opening angle of its jaw is particularly wide. It could seize its prey with ease and inflict fatal bites. On this rock is a Daphosaurus bonerges, also a member of the synapsid class. Unlike the other two, it has a dorsal sail. It measures between 50 centimeters or 20 inches and 3 meters or 10 feet for the largest specimens. Its sail enables it to regulate its temperature. It absorbs and evacuates heat according to its needs. It is a herbivore and a tetrapod. This means it has 2 pairs of limbs and its breathing is pulmonary. The Dinocephalus group has a much thicker, more massive skull. The Dinocephalus group was also widely present during the Permian. These animals vary in shape and size. They can also have very different diets. Some are carnivores or omnivores, while others are herbivores. The Dinocephalus, Tapinocephalus, like the Olamosaurus, is one of these large herbivores. It weighs up to 2 tons and measures around 4.5 meters or 15 feet in length. Until now, we've always talked about carnivorous species. This Dianocephalon is our very first animal to adopt a new diet in the history of life. It was one of the first large herbivores. Despite its massive body, it was the preferred prey of the Dinocephalus titanophonius. To give you an idea of its predatory abilities, its name means Titanic killer in ancient Greek. It measures 3 meters or 10 feet in length. Its head alone measures over 80 centimeters or 31 inches. One of the omnivorous dinocephalans of the Permian was Estimenosuchus orellensis. Its name means crowned crocodile. It is very impressive. Its skull has cranial protuberances. These are like horns on the forehead. Although the animal can easily measure 4 meters or 13 feet in length, its skull remains very imposing in proportion to the rest of its body. It exceeds 68 centimeters or 27 inches in length. The Permian is also characterized by the presence of numerous reptiles that acclimatize perfectly to life on the continent. These include Aphylosaurus lutavensis, a reptile less than a meter long. A much more massive member of the genus is Scutosaurus. Its name means shield lizard. Unlike many reptiles, it held its legs under its body. This enabled it to support its imposing weight, as it weighed close to a ton and measured between 2.5 and 3 meters long, or up to 10 feet. Another specimen I'd like to introduce you to is the Eutybamus. It's much smaller than the Scutosaurus, isn't it? It's just 25 centimeters or 10 inches long. But it's well worth stopping for a moment to take a closer look. I wanted to introduce you to this little lizard because, unlike any other vertebrate we've come across so far, this one has adopted a very particular gait. As you can see, it walks on its 2 hind legs. It's probably the very first bipedal vertebrate in the history of our planet. Let's take advantage of our little jaunt along this stretch of water to talk to you again about amphibians. Their appearance is very peculiar, and they are actually quite different from one another, despite the fact that they belong to the same class. The first is a Platyhistrix. It has a fairly compact body, short legs, and a tail. What sets it apart from the others is its dorsal sail. Like some synapsids, it has a dorsal veil that gives it the appearance of a porcupine. On his back and along his tail, you can also see that he has thick, hard plates. This was undoubtedly a means of defense against predators. The second amphibian I'd like to introduce you to is an Euryops megacephalus. It's quite an imposing animal too, at 2 meters or 7 feet long, and 200 kilos or 440 pounds. It looks like a cross between a frog and a crocodile, or a large salamander. Its 4 limbs and long tail are clearly visible. Like frogs, it has curved teeth, making it a carnivore. It also has 3 pairs of backward curving fangs. This gives us a clue to its hunting style. It traps its prey and swallows it. Each of its backward-pointing, bony projections pushes its meal a little further down its throat. Its dentition enables it to grasp even slippery prey with ease. Now we come to Diplocaulus. This is a lepospondyle amphibian that could reach a meter in length. Individuals of various sizes are known. It can be recognized by its boomerang-shaped skull. The purpose of this protuberance on the head is unclear. Scientists have put forward several hypotheses on the subject. The first is that its small limbs and short tail would not have made it a very good swimmer. Its skull could perhaps serve as an underwater sail, allowing it to lean on ocean currents and rise to the surface, or conversely, to gently sink back to the bottom. The second hypothesis is more defensive in nature. Indeed, given its shape, the Diplocaulus would be a rather difficult animal to swallow. The final theory suggests a camouflage function of sorts. The broad, supple skin lining the boomerang-shaped bony part may have been very similar in color to the seabed of its habitat. The amphibian could then lurk on the ground and wait patiently for prey to pass by. Let's take advantage of our immersion in the water to take a dip in the Panthalassa. What do you say? The air is dry and the heat hard to bear, so the water will cool us down. And who knows, we might even meet some new species. Here we are in the vast ocean. As you can see, the reefs have changed a lot. They're bigger and richer, and the species that live there are much more varied. Corals are back, of course, whether colonial or solitary, but they are no longer the only experienced builders shaping the architecture of these precious reefs. Sponges have made it possible to extend this shelter to an infinite number of species. Look at this sponge, easily over 2 meters or 7 feet long. It's a Gigantospongia, a yellow sponge. Brachiopods also love this corner of the ocean. It's a veritable little paradise where food abounds and hiding places are plentiful. The reefs provide them with food, but also protection from the most fearsome and dangerous predators. When that's not enough, nature reshuffles the evolutionary deck. Here you can see a brachiopoda that's a bit special. It's a nautiloides, Cuperoceras. Look closely at the shell and you'll notice that it's covered in spines. They are filter feeders, which means they feed on very small organisms, such as zooplankton and phytoplankton, or suspended organic particles. They are also sometimes called suspension feeders. These animals are equipped with a system that filters the water to capture only the microorganisms. Other animals have adopted the same filtration diet, including certain mollusks such as lamellibranch mollusks. In the Panthalassa Ocean, mollusks are teeming with life. Cephalopods, goniotites, and nautilus have developed extensively in the surrounding area. They come in all shapes and sizes. But all these crustaceans have to watch their backs. As an aquatic reptile, the Mesosaurus is known for its ferocious appetite. Measuring around 1 meter, it has long, sharp teeth. It uses the power of its tail and feet to propel itself through the water. When hunger strikes, it goes on the hunt. Plankton, fish eggs, small larvae, and crustaceans are no match for its sharp teeth. This aquatic lizard must also have crossed paths with the many fish that inhabit the ocean. Cartilaginous fish, ray-finned bony fish, and flesh-finned bony fish have invaded the ocean. These fish are on the alert. Danger lurks. In the distance, in their wake, a helicoprion is hot on their trail. It's a member of the shark family. It measures between 8 and 10 meters long, or around 30 feet. Its lower jaw is a veritable killing machine, with a spiral dental structure. This spiral measures 30 centimeters or 12 inches in diameter, and has no fewer than 160 teeth. Everyone here has found their place. Each species evolves and participates in the great cycle of life. We're about to leave this sea, churned up by hunting in the depths, and yet so calm on the surface. All the animals we've met, both marine and terrestrial, could hardly have imagined what was about to happen. An unprecedented mass extinction. The causes of this extinction, of the disappearance of thousands of species, are still very unclear today. Many hypotheses have been put forward. The first evokes the asphyxiation of the oceans. Another puts the emphasis on strong volcanic activity. Yet another suggests a major drop in sea level. According to a 2019 study published in the journal Nature, plants and vegetation were the first victims of this extinction. Scientists have found traces in several parts of the Earth of large quantities of nickel released into the atmosphere following volcanic eruptions in Siberia. This would then have poisoned plant life. The massive disappearance of plants led to the disappearance of herbivores, followed by carnivores. This event, affecting vegetation, is one of two mass extinctions of plants, the other being the collapse of the Carboniferous rainforest 305 million years ago. The Permian-Triassic extinction led to the loss of 95% of marine species and 75% of terrestrial species in less than 4 million years. The consequence of this mass extinction, due to the depletion of oxygen in the atmosphere, favored species with air sacs, including the ancestors of the dinosaurs. This is how the archosaurs, which include the crocodilians, dinosaurs, and pterosaurs, as well as certain synapsids, such as the cynodonts, ancestors of modern mammals, escaped the mass extinction. It's time for us to leave this desolate landscape and hit the road for the Triassic. We leave the Paleozoic to take our first steps into the Mesozoic. The first era of the Mesozoic, the Triassic, is also the last stage of our journey. In fact, the Earth's activity is about to change the order of things once again. Nature is constantly evolving. Nothing is ever the same. In a few million years' time, animals will no longer be able to cross from one continent to another without difficulty and with dry feet. Pangea will gradually begin its slow fragmentation. Before discussing this phenomenon, we need to get to the Panthalassa Ocean while there's still time. Soon, the seabed won't be the same here either. We've left the ocean on a tragic note for all living organisms of this era. The ocean is still recovering from this major extinction. The lower Triassic is marked by a slow and difficult rediversification of species after the Permian-Triassic crisis. Almost all species were wiped off the map. coral reefs are struggling to recover, renew, and reconstitute themselves. It was in the ocean that life first hatched on Earth. The ocean will manage to rise from its ashes. Although corals have almost disappeared, some species have survived and are now gradually coming back to life at the bottom of the sea. Hexacoralliar corals are replacing tetracoralliar corals. Calcareous algae are also invaluable architects, enriching and diversifying young reefs. They provide an extraordinary environment for mollusks, such as this pretty cephalopod, an ammonite, Ceratites semipartitus, a mollusk with a coiled shell. Other species try to make a place for themselves in the vast ocean. Look, here's a crinoid. Crinoids are, remember, echinoderms like the starfish or sea urchin. Reptiles also invade the marine environment. Placodonts, nothosaurs, and ichthyosaurs populate warm waters. Let's begin our journey by discovering some placodonts, marine sauropsids from the Triassic period. They belong to the marine diapsids, whose bodies are protected by a carapace of enlarged ribs, or even fused ribs in some species. Their large cobblestone-like teeth crushed the shells they plucked from the seabed. They could even pluck them from rocks, thanks to the flattened teeth at the front of their jaws. They are all very large, between 2 and 3 meters, or between 6 and 10 feet for most of them. Despite their size, they are not large carnivores in the strict sense of the word. As we said a moment ago, they feed mainly on bivalves, brachiopods, and other small invertebrates. They have flat, rather large protruding teeth that enable them to easily crush even the most solid shells. Here is just such a placodont. Placodonts vary in shape. Some are rather elongated, like Placodus or Paraplacodus, while others are more turtle-like, like Cephaderma or Placochelys, for example. The latter, Placochelys, has a carapace. It's covered with a series of bony bumps that give it a rigid, solid structure. This is called osteoderm protection. This structure in the dermal layers of the skin is a means of defense against many predators. After a timid attempt in the Permian, diapsids also invaded the marine environment. The Nothosaurus seen here on the hunt is also a mixed creature, like our latest placodonts, but this time not in appearance, but in its living environment. About 3 meters or 10 feet tall, it has short webbed legs and an elongated neck that ends in a flattened head. The jaws bristling with long, sharp teeth leave no doubt as to the animal's fish-eating diet. It divided its time between land and water, much like today's seals. While these Nothosaurus were most often found in the water to feed on fish, they could also haul themselves up onto beaches to rest and enjoy the warmth of the sun. Scientists assume that they also came to the surface during the egg-laying season. They then laid their eggs on land, just like the sea turtles we know. Let's leave this Nothosaurus to enjoy his meal and continue our investigations into a new group, the ichthyosaurs. Ichthyosaurs are marine diapsid vertebrates. They are somewhat similar to dolphins. Californosaurus measures around 3 meters or 10 feet. It has a head with a long snout, but it looks very small in proportion to the rest of the body. It also has a bent tail and a small vertical fin on its back. Utahtsasaurus shares some features with our previous marine diapsid. Its head is small, and the rest of its body much more massive. There are also 2 pairs of fins on the flanks. Utahtsasaurus lacks a dorsal fin, however. This does not prevent it from being an excellent swimmer. Like Utahtsasaurus, Chauhosaurus gaishenensis has no dorsal fin. It is also much smaller, measuring less than 2 meters or 7 feet, and weighing between 10 and 45 kilograms, or 6 and 30 pounds. Its backbone allows it to undulate, rather like an eel. It lives in the shallow waters of continental shelves. Mixosaurus is also a primitive ichthyosaurian and measures between 1 and 2 meters or 7 feet in length. Mixosaurus has long, narrow jaws with sharp teeth, perfectly suited to fishing. It lies between the primitive ichthyosaurs and more evolved forms. It has a small dorsal fin and a flipper-like outline on the upper part of its tail. This fin is supported by a slightly arched spine. Its limbs are shaped like swimming paddles, with those in front larger than those behind. Each flipper has 5 fingers. These ichthyosaurs probably cross paths with Perlatus, an actinopterygian fish. Actinopterygians are bony fish whose fins are supported by rays. The Perlatus measures 15 centimeters or 6 inches. It is toothed and its jaw has a wide opening angle. It also has dorsal and anal fins, giving it a certain ease of movement in the water. Another common Triassic fish is the Babasatrania. It managed to survive the Permian-Triassic extinction. It lives in coastal and shallow waters off Pangea. It has several types of fins and is a very good swimmer. Its shape is rather elongated and round. Its teeth are flat and solid, enabling it to feed on shells. It crushes and grinds them. Speaking of shells, this brings us to another subject. The global climate remains warm throughout the Triassic period, and at the end of the Triassic, this particular climate favored the appearance of a new type of plankton, the calcareous shelled plankton and nanoplankton, which were to profoundly alter the ecology and the marine food chain, as well as ocean chemistry. Plankton is no longer essentially vegetable, but also animal. Before I leave the ocean, I'd like to introduce you to one last marine species. Here's an amazing marine reptile, Attopodondatus unicus. It has a very elongated body, rather large limbs compared to what we've seen so far, and a singular head. This peculiar shape suggested that it was a supensivorous microphagous animal. In other words, it feeds on very small organisms and organic food particles, filtering the water in suspension. But after observing new fossils and remains of these animals, it turns out to be a herbivore after all. This makes it one of the oldest known herbivorous marine reptiles. During this trip, you'll have had the chance to discover many iconic species of their period. But it's already time for you to continue your journey, leaving the vast ocean behind and heading for land. There you'll see how nature is slowly coming back to life. Although it never really disappeared, it was running out of steam and becoming increasingly impoverished. Lycopodiales, cycadales, ginkgophytes, and glossopterides gradually gave way to conifers. Plant cover is now increasingly lush, especially in the northern hemisphere. However, Pangea's great size undoubtedly limited the influence of the ocean on its climate, and large deserts were therefore to extend to the center of Pangea. Here, living conditions were much more difficult, even hostile. While a few amphibians and mammalian reptiles survived the Permian-Triassic crisis, diapsid reptiles became increasingly important. One of them, the Archosaurus, even played a key role in biological evolution. According to scientific studies, Archosaurus gave rise to crocodiles, dinosaurs, and pterosaurs, but also to groups that disappeared at the end of the Triassic, such as phytosaurs, atosaurs, and brachiosaurians. This Euparkeria is one of the best-known archosaurs of its time. Euparkeria carpensis has a slender body, a long tail, and an elongated head. It's a small one by the standards of what we encountered a few moments ago. It measures around 55 centimeters or 22 inches and weighs just 10 kilograms or 22 pounds. It has small sting-like teeth and a pointed thumb claw. This enables it to dig for insects or small amphibians burrowed in soil or wood. Here, large predators are numerous and dangerous. To find its place in the cycle of life and provide for its nutritional needs, this little Euparkeria has found the answer: speed. Its hind legs, which are longer than its front ones, enable it to run over short distances, either to escape a predator or to flush out prey. Another archosomorph, diapsid, is also present in the area. This time we're dealing with a member of the Rhynchosaurian family. It's a Hyperodepeton huxleya. It has a short triangular skull, perfectly interlocking jaws, and several rows of teeth. Its lower jaw has 2 rows of teeth, one on the upper edge and another a little lower, on the inner edge. It also has a premaxilla, or incisor bone. This is a split cranial bone located in the anterior part of the upper jaw and equipped with teeth. The latter can be seen protruding from the mouth. Despite all this dental armada, the Hyperodapedon huxleyi is a herbivore. Who would have thought? It feeds on tough plants. To do this, it has powerful chewing muscles. Claws are also an asset, enabling him to feed more easily. It can scratch the ground and dig up roots and tubers. The approaching animal, on the other hand, is anything but a herbivore. In fact, it's a cousin of the crocodile. It's a Rossuchian reptile, the Titanosuchus. Its entire body is covered with a veritable armor of bony plates, excrescences composed of chitin, dentin, or keratin, found notably in crocodilians. Its limbs lie directly under its body, almost vertically. It has a more evolved and complex ankle joint, making it a formidable predator. It is fast, efficient, and hunts reptiles and fish. The Tanystropheus I'd like to introduce you to now is also very different from the other members of the reptile group. This time, it has a very long neck of 3 meters and measures almost 6 meters or 20 feet in total. Its tail and neck are very impressive. This Tanystropheus is quite enigmatic even today. Scientists have put forward 2 hypotheses about its diet and lifestyle. The first is that it used its long neck to reach high up in the trees to flush out small tree-dwelling reptiles. Others think it was a fish eater. It is not adapted to aquatic life, but it can travel along the coast, and thanks to its long neck, reach the shoals of fish on the seashore. Here's a Thrinaxodon that belongs to the synapsids. Thrinaxodon is about 50 centimeters or 20 inches long and weighs 3 kilograms or 7 pounds. It is similar to both a reptile and a mammal, and shares a number of criteria with both groups. It has a semi-erect posture on its limbs. This brings it closer to reptiles. But it also has vibrissae and probably a fur-covered body. One hypothesis even suggests a principle of homeothermy, i.e., an internal temperature, independent of the environment it occupies. However, these characteristics are more closely related to a mammal. If it managed to survive the Permian crisis, it's undoubtedly thanks to its lifestyle. This nocturnal animal is a burrower. Its dentition is differentiated with incisors, canines, and molars. It hunts small herbivores and invertebrates. During the Triassic period, many insects were present. Biological evolution also took place in this group, as the first fully metamorphosing insects gradually took hold. Complete metamorphosis is also known as holometabolous development. This means that metamorphosis passes through 4 distinct stages: egg, larva, nymph, and imago, or adult. This is the case for Coleoptera, Diptera, and Lepidoptera. During the Triassic period, beetles such as Cardiocine elegans and Cardiocine obesa could be seen. Speaking of evolution, the Triassic was marked by the arrival of the planet's first dinosaurs. They arrived at the end of the Triassic, so you can't leave the Triassic without meeting a handful of them. Let's start with a medium-sized specimen, Colophysis. It lives close to waterways and can reach 3 meters or 10 feet in length and a height of around 1 meter or 3 feet. It weighs between 15 and 30 kilograms, or between 30 and 70 pounds for the largest. It has knife-like teeth curved backwards to feed on small animals such as lizards or small mammals, but it can also hunt in packs. It can then attack much larger animals, such as the Placerius, a herbivore weighing close to a ton. The Euraptor, on the other hand, lived on floodplains where volcanic activity is very strong. Seasonal variations are common, and heavy rains common in the region. 1 meter long and 40 centimeters or 16 inches high, this small dinosaur is bipedal and weighs barely 10 kilos. Here we have one of the rare omnivorous specimens. It feeds not only on small animals, but also on tender leaves and fruit. Its only defense tactic is to flee. The construction of its skeleton and the position of its limbs give it, great speed of movement. Another tetrapod dinosaur of the same size lived in swampy regions. Here it found insects, lizards, and other small prey in abundance, as well as plenty of hiding places from larger predators, such as archosaurian carnivores. Procompsognathus was long, just over a meter, but not very long, just 30 centimeters or 12 inches. It weighed no more than 2.5 kilograms or 6 pounds. He too is bipedal. He has short arms and hands with 3 clawed fingers. It also has a rather long snout and numerous small teeth that enable it to tear up its prey. However, it must beware of the Titanosuchus ferox, or the Rutiodon carolinensis, both of which are Procompsognathus's main predators. All these animals have probably also crossed paths with 2 herbivores living in the same region, Plateosaurus or Euphrasia. Plateosaurus is a sauropodomorph dinosaur, weighing almost 4 tons. It measured 8 meters or 26 feet in length. Although it walked on 4 legs, it could also run on its 2 hind legs when necessary. The Plateosaurus had a small head and an elongated body. Its strong, robust limbs and long, heavy tail were equipped with powerful muscles. Its long neck enabled it to reach foliage 3 or 4 meters or 13 feet above the ground. The Euphrasia is also bipedal and quadrupedal. This herbivore has a premaxillary bone bearing 4 teeth. It used gastroliths, stomach stones, which it swallowed and stored in the stomach to help grind food and provide minerals. I'd like to end this journey into the Triassic period with one of the oldest dinosaurs, or rather one of the very first of its kind. It may not be the ancestor of all dinosaurs, but it is undoubtedly a close relative. Herrerasaurus ishigualastensis is 3 meters or 10 feet long, exclusively bipedal, and a predator capable of attacking virtually any vertebrate in its ecosystem. It has a highly articulated jaw and curved teeth for tearing flesh. The arm and forearm are fairly short, while the hand is elongated. The first 2 fingers and thumb end in sharp curved claws for grasping prey. The 4th and 5th fingers are stumps without claws. It has strong hind legs with short thighs and fairly long feet, indicating that it was probably a fast runner. The partially stiffened tail balanced the body and was also adapted for speed. Although it shares most of the characteristics of dinosaurs, there are a few differences, particularly in the shape of its hips and the bones of its hind limbs. It is undoubtedly a very primitive representative of the dinosaurs, and one of the oldest known to date. This one, like all the others, is probably not ready for what lies ahead. Although Pangea began to fracture at the end of the Permian, it was not until the end of the Triassic period that the changes were really felt. Rift systems separate North America and Africa. These rifts are collapse trenches located along a fracture in the Earth's crust during the process of extinction. Pangea underwent this fracture in 2 stages. The first began with the opening of Tethys along an east-to-west axis that separated Laurasia to the north and Gondwana to the south. During the Cenozoic, it was the Indian Ocean's turn to open up. Plates migrated northwards, and the Atlantic Ocean also opened up. At the same time, the Arabian-African plate rose and the Neotethys closed, leading to the formation of the Alpine Belt. These radical changes, this fracturing of the Earth, this internal activity of the Earth, were to have irreparable consequences, whether on the landscape, the climate, or life itself. How did all this happen? How did animals live through this period? We'll be looking for the answers on our next trip. The history of dinosaurs is ancient and therefore difficult to grasp. This is, of course, the main reason why it is so difficult to analyze their remains. They left many traces of their passage, but it's always complicated to process elements that are tens or even hundreds of millions of years old. Another reason for errors of analysis and interpretation is the length of time they were on Earth. The dinosaur period is so long ago that it sometimes seems much shorter than it actually was. They ruled the Earth for almost 165 million years. If the history of the Earth from its formation to the present day were measured in years, the dinosaurs would have been on Earth for 14 days. This may not sound like much, but it's far more impressive than the time taken by modern humans, represented by Homo sapiens, which is 35 minutes in the same year. If we go back in history to the arrival of the very first dinosaurs, we should find ourselves in the Triassic period, around 250 million years ago. It was at this time, after an unprecedented biological crisis, that the dinosaurs arrived on Earth. Our planet has experienced several mass extinctions, including the one that put an end to the existence of non-avian dinosaurs some 165 million years later. The latter is undoubtedly the most popular with the general public. But what is less well known is that it was neither the only nor the most important one. The extinction that marks the end of the Permian and the beginning of the Triassic, which we're about to look at, was like no other. It was the most devastating extinction of all. This mass extinction occurred around 252 million years ago. As we've seen, it marks the boundary between the Permian and Triassic geological periods, and thus between the Paleozoic and Mesozoic eras. And the era of the dinosaurs is the Mesozoic era. This era is itself made up of the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous respectively. Right now we're between the Permian and Triassic eras, in the midst of the chaos that reigns in every corner of the globe. In the collective imagination, an extinction is violent, sudden, and very rapid. It would arrive like a gigantic bomb, capable of wiping out 3/4 of the Earth in a fraction of a second. Contrary to popular belief, this extinction is spread over several thousand years and has many causes. Since 2021, we know a little more about the origins of the Permian-Triassic extinction. For a long time it was thought that only the volcanoes of the Siberian traps were responsible for the chaos to come. But we now know that it's probably a little more complex than that. While Siberian volcanic activity is a perfect match in terms of dates for these climate changes, a study published by Nature Geoscience sheds light on another, very intense, violent terrestrial activity that extends over a long period of time. This is Australian volcanic activity. It predates the Siberian traps and lasted for almost 4 million years. Based on the latest results of this study, published in May 2022, This activity could explain a change in climate prior to the extinction event, starting several thousand years ago, particularly in the ocean. This earlier, longer-lasting change is far more likely than a rapid, violent event. Climate change is a gradual process, but it impacts all elements of the biotope and biocenosis. The consequences are irreparable. The Siberian traps are mainly characterized by huge outpourings of basaltic lava. Australia is a different kettle of fish. Eruption activity is high, but also very violent. Australian supereruptions are said to have been marked by catastrophic explosions, spewing huge quantities of ash and gas into the atmosphere. These ash deposits can now be seen in numerous sedimentary series throughout eastern Australia. Researchers believe that these could be the most violent eruptions the Earth has ever seen. It is highly likely that these explosive eruptions were accompanied by the massive release of greenhouse gases, initiating the climatic upheaval that led to the biological crisis that marked the end of the Permian. However, volcanic activity in the traps cannot be ruled out. Let's just say that while the Siberian traps may not be the sole cause, they could well be the last straw. According to a study dated 2021 for PNAS and conducted by several Norwegian, American, Chinese, and Dutch scientists, the massive and rapid emission of predominantly volcanic CO2 is responsible for the Permian-Triassic biological crisis. The volcanic phenomenon led to an estimated temperature rise of between 5 and 8 degrees Celsius, or between 9 and 15 degrees Fahrenheit. A difference of this magnitude is bound to have a colossal impact on the biotope and biocenosis. All ecosystems are at risk. Global warming and ocean acidification have made the planet unlivable, explain the scientists. During this ecological catastrophe, the oceans were the first to be affected, becoming dead zones. The decomposition of aquatic plants and animals in turn created clouds of poisonous gas. The air became unbreathable and asphyxiating. During the Permian-Triassic period, almost all biodiversity disappeared in less than 100,000 years. 96% of marine species and over 75% of terrestrial species were devastated. But nature always rises from the ashes. After this unprecedented crisis, life managed to breathe new life into itself. Some species have survived, others are about to blossom. If nature manages to reclaim its rights, it is not without difficulty. It took several million years for flora and fauna to regain possession of numerous territories. Some species managed to escape the worst. These include synapsids such as the cynodonts, ancestors of modern mammals, and the crown group of archosaurs, which dominated the entire Secondary era, giving rise to dinosaurs, flying reptiles, and crocodiles. Dinosaurs have one thing in common. Their skulls feature an opening in front of the eye socket, known as the anteorbital window. But we'll have time to talk more about them soon. Right now, it's time to meet some of their descendants. Dinosaurs are extraordinary animals. They lived on Earth for millions of years and have a lot to teach us. Thanks to technology and a healthy dose of scientific knowledge and study, we can initiate a virtual journey to the Mesozoic era. Take a seat and settle in. The adventure begins in the Triassic, and your journey starts now. Here we are in dinosaur land. This is Pangea. A vast ocean called Panthalassa surrounds this landmass, forming a single continent. Contrary to popular belief, Pangea does not have a single climate. The land of the dinosaurs was neither a vast swamp, as far as the eye could see, nor an almost tropical jungle. The climate was not the same on either side of the continent. In the center of Pangea, comprising present-day Europe, the Americas, and Africa, the climate was predominantly desert. On the other hand, what is now India, Siberia, and even Antarctica enjoy a temperate climate. The Earth is a far cry from what we know today. It's as if someone has mixed up all the pieces of the puzzle. Nothing seems to fit. And yet, for tens of millions of years, this was the configuration of the Earth. This unique land was also the cradle of the dinosaurs. These animals experienced a variety of climates, geological periods, and adapted to different environments, from deserts to mountains to jungles. Around 230 million years ago, the first members of the dinosaur group began to appear. Depending on geographic zone, environment, and climate, animals diversified to adapt. If you remember from our little introduction, we mentioned almost 1,200 species, and that's just the species known to man. So you can imagine the diversity that reigned in this large family. When we think of dinosaurs, we immediately think of large animals, but the earliest dinosaur specimens are a far cry from the usual cliché of giant dinosaurs. The oldest confirmed dinosaurs, which lived 230 million years ago, were Saurischia. First of all, there's Saturnalia, a dinosaur whose classification was long debated until 2007. As it includes features of both sauropodomorphs and theropods. It measures around 1 to 2 meters, or 3 to 6 feet in length, and is probably no taller than an adult's knees. At the same time, there was also the Staurikosaurus. This ancestor of both sauropods and theropods was discovered in South America. It's hard to describe it with any precision because we're up against our scientific limitations here. We lack real, identifiable, and analyzable elements. With the few remains that researchers have at their disposal, they have been able to make estimates. Judging by the size of the jaw, it seems to be one of the smaller dinosaurs, measuring 2 meters or 6 feet long. It probably weighs just 30 kilograms or 66 pounds. Its sharp teeth suggest a carnivorous diet. That's about all we know about it. Then there's Herrerasaurus. He too is a bipedal carnivore. It measures between 3 and 5 meters, or between 10 and 16 feet long, just 1 meter or 3 feet high, and weighs up to 350 kilograms or 770 pounds. It's a pretty fearsome carnivore. It has a jaw with a flexible articulation and sharp curved teeth. This mouthful of teeth enables it to rip the flesh off all the vertebrates in its ecosystem, including herbivores of the Rhynchosaur order, such as Hyperodapodon huxleyi and the Decynodont order, as well as omnivores of the Edosaur order, such as Aetosauroids scaglii. Another dinosaur in the featherweight category is the Euraptor. It too is very small compared to the Diplodocus or Brachiosaurus that illustrate children's tales about dinosaurs. It measures just 1 meter, or 3 feet long, and 40 centimeters or 16 inches high. He was probably more of an omnivore. He had 5 fingers on each hand. The 3 longest ended in large claws, which he used to hold his prey. He would quickly pounce on them to take them by surprise and stack the odds in his favor. But thanks to its large claws, it could also catch plants. It is assumed that it fed on small animals, tender leaves, and fruit. Paleontologists who have studied the remains of Euraptor believe it to be one of the oldest known dinosaurs. Why do they think so? Because it is not a highly evolved predator. All the evidence suggests that it is a primitive dinosaur, so to speak. Unlike theropods, it doesn't have a slippery lower jaw to hold its prey. Likewise, only a few of its teeth are curved and crenulated. In a more evolved predator, all the teeth have acquired this shape. Yet we know that Euraptor belonged to the Saurischians thanks to the configuration of its thighs and pelvis. Euraptor is therefore older than Herrerasaurus. Finally, there's Auwalcaria, considered a basal Saurischian, a small bipedal omnivore that shares many similarities with Euraptor. These are the first small dinosaurs you might have encountered in the Triassic period. But other dinosaurs, even in the Jurassic era, were small. Compsognathus is no longer than 1 meter or 3 feet and weighs around 2.5 kilograms or 5 pounds. Despite this, it has made its mark on the land of giants, just like the Anchiornis. It measures no more than 30 centimeters or 12 inches high. Its bird-like appearance has complicated its classification by scientists. But Michael Pittman, a paleontologist from the University of Hong Kong, and some of his colleagues seriously believe that it was either a primitive bird or a bird-like troodontid dinosaur. In other words, it is a primitive member of the dinosaur group, which includes birds and bird-like dinosaurs. They share their closest common ancestor with birds. In the Cretaceous too, we can still encounter small dinosaurs. In 2022, scientists discovered one of them. The paleontologists published their discovery in the journal Scientific Reports, describing a dinosaur between 94 and 97 million years old. It measures around 1.5 meters or 5 feet in length, including tail, and weighs between 4 and 7 kilograms, or between 9 and 15 pounds, about the size of a domestic cat. The animal is robust, yet knows how to protect itself. Fossils have revealed the presence of a series of bony plates between the neck and tail. This is Jacopil, Caniacura. Not all dinosaurs were giants. We could mention many other dinosaurs of modest size, but I'd like to tell you about the origins of these animals, about their ancestors, who are just as modest in size as those we've just mentioned. The first dinosaurs appeared at the end of the Triassic period. Their anatomy has a number of features in common, which is why they form a group and are thought to share a common ancestor. They have reduced fourth and fifth fingers, 4 legs, a tail, thick skin, and a pelvis united by 3 or more sacral vertebrae. They also have oviparous reproduction and legs located under the body rather than on its sides. This is what unites dinosaurs within the same family and allows us to attribute common origins and a common ancestor to them. So who was the ancestor of the dinosaurs? This common ancestor is to be found among small, lightly built archosaurs that show the beginning of dinosaur locomotor adaptations, such as Marasuchus, discovered in the Middle Triassic of Argentina, or Congonaphon kelly. It's the latter, measuring just 10 centimeters or 4 inches, that we're mainly interested in. Can you imagine? 10 centimeters or 4 inches only, and yet he's the father of such colossi as Diplodocus, Argentinosaurus, Brachiosaurus, T-Rex, Stegosaurus, and Triceratops, whose dimensions are far more generous than his. Congonaphon is small. Very small if you compare its measurements with those of the most popular dinosaurs, but it is one of the last common ancestors of dinosaurs and pterosaurs. It is therefore at the very origin of the evolution towards dinosaurs. Dinosaurs and pterosaurs belong to the ornithodai or clade, their last common ancestor before their separation some 230 to 240 million years ago. Congonaphon kelly is close to the divergence between dinosaurs and pterosaurs. It could, therefore, be one of the missing links in biological evolution. But how did this little creature manage to survive and get through the climatic crises? As we saw above, the Permian-Triassic crisis led to a drop in biodiversity. As this drop in biodiversity impacted plant life, oxygen production fell. The depletion of oxygen in the atmosphere would have favored species with air sacs, such as the ancestors of the dinosaurs. The latter also had down covering their skin, as is the case with Congonaphon. This would have helped its thermoregulation. As the second half of the Triassic period was characterized by extreme climatic changes, with very hot days followed by very cold nights, the small feathers would have enabled the creature to maintain a comfortable internal temperature. Speaking of origins and evolution, you may have noticed that dinosaur species are very diverse. It's a very heterogeneous group, and yet we classify them all in the same group. It's hard to find a glaring similarity between the Anchiornis and the Ankylosaurus, isn't it? And yet they do belong to the same group, and we're going to find out why. To better appreciate and understand dinosaurs, it's important to be able to tell them apart and classify them. There are two main groups of dinosaurs. We sometimes confuse these groups with their diet, whether carnivorous or herbivorous, or their posture, whether on 2 or 4 legs. The difference between these two groups lies in their pelvis. The orientation of the pubis, a bone in the pelvis of tetrapods, points downwards and forwards in saurischians, and rather backwards in ornithischians. Determining and understanding what distinguishes these two groups will enable us to learn more about dinosaurs. Saurischians differentiated themselves around 230 million years ago. They are themselves divided into two groups. First, there are the theropods. Theropod means animal feet. Theropod fossils have been discovered on every continent, in rocks dating from the Upper Triassic to the Upper Cretaceous, i.e., from around 225 to 65 million years ago. Theropods are bipedal, generally carnivorous. Their hind limbs provide support and locomotion. The front limbs are short, but equipped with movable fingers. These fingers are undoubtedly adapted for grasping and tearing prey. There are several major groups of theropods. The oldest is the Ceratosaurus. They range in size from the tiny Colophysis, less than 2 meters or 7 feet long, to the Ceratosaurus, around 6 meters or 20 feet. Then there are the Tetanurians. These are the successors to the ceratosaurs we've just seen. The Tetanurians include carnosaurs such as Allosaurus and Coelurosaurus, a larger group that includes tyrannosaurs, dromaeosaurs, and ostrich dinosaurs. In both Coelurosaurs and carnosaurs, many bones were hollow, and the jaws generally bore sharp, curved teeth along their entire length. Herrerasaurus, one of the oldest known dinosaurs, was undoubtedly a theropod, or one of their close cousins. Colophysis was probably one of the first theropods. This group also includes Tyrannosaurus, Velociraptor, and Baryonyx. These bipeds vary in size. They can weigh anything from a few kilos to nearly 6 tons. Sauropodomorphs are quadrupeds, generally herbivores. They have small heads resting on long necks. They also have long tails. Their group name means lizard-footed form. In the late Triassic, there were 2 main groups of sauropodomorphs. The prosauropods, which means before lizard feet, and therefore before sauropods, were medium-sized, like Lufengosaurus. Then there were the sauropods, meaning lizard feet, which could reach gigantic sizes, like Apatosaurus. Diplodocus and Argentinosaurus belonged to this group. They had imposing bodies and large stomachs, enabling them to digest large quantities of foliage. Most also had thumbs, terminating in large claws. Plateosaurus is a fine example of a sauropodomorph. It measures between 8 and 9 meters or 30 feet in length. It probably moves most of the time on its 4 legs, but it can stand up on its 2 hind legs. Prosauropods and sauropods spread throughout the world. While prosauropods disappeared in the lower Jurassic, sauropods continued to diversify throughout the Mesozoic. The other major group is the Ornithischians. A large part of the pubis is directed downwards and backwards as in birds, and not downwards and forwards as in most reptiles. When it comes to birds, then, we'd be inclined to think that their ancestors were Ornithischians. But, paradoxical as it may seem, birds are descended from Saurischian dinosaurs. But back to the group of dinosaurs with bird-like pelvises. The Ornithischians can be divided into 2 subgroups, the Sauropods and the Theriophores. Theriophorus means shield-bearer. They have a cuirass on their backs with bony plates, but sometimes also spikes or spurs. Herbivores, theriophores, are armored dinosaurs and, for the most part, quadrupedal. They comprise 2 main groups, stegosaurids and ankylosaurs. These 2 groups share not only dermal armor, but also a variety of other features, including their small teeth, arranged in a single curved row. Both groups derive from a line of smaller armored dinosaurs, such as Scutellosaurus and Scelidosaurus from the lower Jurassic. The cephalopods include the ornithopods, pachycephalosaurs, and ceratopsians, the latter two groups often grouped together under the name marginocephalans. Ornithopods are known from the beginning of the Jurassic to the end of the Cretaceous. They are therefore among the dinosaur lineages that had the greatest and longest evolutionary success. This group includes the Fabrosaurids, Heterodontosaurids, Hypsilophodontids, Iguanodontids, and Hadrosaurids. Fabrosaurs are the oldest and most primitive ornithopods. These small, lightly built dinosaurs grew to between 60 and 120 centimeters, or between 24 inches and 47 inches in length. Hadrosaurs, on the other hand, could reach 9 to 11 meters, or 30 to 36 feet in length. They are duck-billed dinosaurs. Their posterior teeth, crushing and located inside cheeks, were very well adapted to chewing vegetation. They traveled in herds and cared for their young, who were very immature at birth, as is the case with most mammals and birds today. Hadrosaurs include Shantungosaurus, Parasaurophilus, and Lambeosaurus. Hypsilophodontidae are great runners. They measure between 1.5 and 4 meters, or between 5 and 13 feet in length. This group includes Hypsilophodon. Among the Iguanidae, of course, we find one of the most popular dinosaurs, the Iguanodon. Equipped with complex teeth, typical of advanced ornithopods, it is the largest of its kind, reaching 11 meters or 36 feet in length. So here's what we can learn from the great dinosaur family and the Saurischian and Ornithischian groups. Despite their great divergences, dinosaurs have a lot in common, and a common origin. Biological evolution has enlarged the family, with groups and subgroups. But there's one thing we forgot to mention. We didn't mention marine dinosaurs or flying dinosaurs. In your opinion, are they classified as Saurischians or Ornithischians? Well, we can't classify them in the dinosaur family, for the simple reason that they're not dinosaurs. These marine reptiles from the dinosaur era are sometimes called marine dinosaurs, seemingly logical. But dinosaurs are only terrestrial. No dinosaurs lived exclusively in water. Marine reptiles mistaken for dinosaurs do not have the same characteristics, origins, or common ancestor as dinosaurs. They therefore do not belong to the same group as dinosaurs. Ichthyosaurus, Plesiosaurus, and Mosasaurus are marine reptiles. Why differentiate between these two families, dinosaurs and marine reptiles? Why isn't the animal we see here moving in the ocean a dinosaur? Yet it lived in the Mesozoic era at the same time as the dinosaurs. As we have seen, specific animal classification criteria lay the foundations for each family, each class, each group. In that of the dinosaurs, we noted that these animals had 4 legs, and that these were located under the belly. This is not the case with our marine reptiles. As you can see, if they do have 4 legs, they are only on the sides, on the animal's flanks, and not under its belly. Dinosaurs and marine reptiles don't have the same common ancestor either. Marine reptiles cannot therefore be dinosaurs. We're looking at an ichthyosaurus. This sea behemoth can reach up to 20 meters or 66 feet in length. It's a very popular marine reptile that looks a bit like our modern-day dolphins. This carnivorous reptile had an elongated snout and powerful jaws with sharp teeth. It fed on fish, ammonites, cephalopod mollusks with spiral shells, and belemnites, cephalopod mollusks related to cuttlefish. We imagine it to be a fearsome predator. Indeed, it has been for nearly 160 million years, but limiting its lifestyle to this trait is a bit simplistic. Contrary to our image of a solitary aggressive predator, Ichthyosaurus was also a social animal. A recent study into the behavior of ichthyosaurs was published in Cell magazine in November 2022. The results clearly show that Ichthyosaurus had similar habits to our whales. Ichthyosaurs migrated extensively and above all lived in groups during the birthing season. The team of paleontologists in charge of this study used a micro CT X-ray scanner to study a precise geographical area, a fossil deposit located in the Humboldt Toyab Forest in Nevada, USA. They found embryos and newborns of a species of ichthyosaur called Shawnosaurus. Why were so many ichthyosaurs concentrated in one place? This is the mystery that paleontologists have been trying to unravel. Thanks to the use of technology and various analysis tools, a climatic cause, such as a sudden change in temperature, has been ruled out. Nothing had disrupted their ecosystem. Mass stranding has also been ruled out, as scientists are now confident that the bones sank to the bottom of the sea. It's likely that there was no food for them in this region, and yet we can see a large number of newborns and embryos. So what does this tell us? Well, the American National Forest, which could have been described as an ancient burial ground, is in fact an ancient maternity hospital. Ichthyosaurs used to gather here to give birth to their young. They were undoubtedly returning to the place where they themselves years earlier had given birth. But back to the dinosaurs, and to be more precise, the flying dinosaurs we haven't yet classified. Pterosaurs are part of the dinosaur bestiary. They lived during the same period. But pterosaurs are not dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are ornithodyirid diapsid archosaurs. This somewhat barbaric term refers to a group of animals. It consists solely of dinosaurs and their descendants, and pterosaurs. These are the only two groups in this animal class. Of all the different groups of dinosaurs, the pterosaurs are the closest. It's hardly surprising, then, that we find a family resemblance and tend to confuse them. Pterosaurs were the first vertebrates to tame the sky, at least as far as we know. Like dinosaurs, pterosaurs come in a wide variety of species. Some, like the Sordae, measure barely 60 centimeters or 24 inches. while others, like the Anhangara, approach 4 meters or 13 feet. The pteranodon has a wingspan of over 6 meters or 20 feet long. But that's nothing compared to the gigantic Hatzegapteryx, which, with its wings spread, could practically cover a bus with its 10-meter or 33 feet wingspan. If they are so close to the dinosaurs, it's because they share a common ancestor. At some point in their history, evolution allowed dinosaurs on one side and pterosaurs on the other to hatch. What happened between this common ancestor and the pterosaurs? What are the stages of evolution? What are the different links in the chain that led to the birth of flying vertebrates, and thus to the hatching of pterosaurs? Well, the mystery remains, and the question still unanswered. For the moment, no tangible evidence has been found to fully and scientifically resolve this enigma. Millions of years have passed between the common ancestors and pterosaurs. The physical difference between the two is more than striking, since one is winged and the other probably a small 4-legged terrestrial vertebrate. Even so, all the most primitive pterosaurs we know today are well developed, and several species already existed at this time. Evolution was well underway. The stage preceding this phase of evolution is not yet known. For the ancestor of pterosaurs to give rise to true pterosaurs, one species had to have evolved differently from the others. A species that would be closer to pterosaurs in terms of physical appearance or flight capabilities, but which would also have something in common with an exclusively terrestrial species. This key species is a fact we are certain of, but we currently have no fossils that would enable us to piece together the puzzle, to establish a sufficiently solid link to find this famous missing link. Nevertheless, one hypothesis seems more serious than the others, and could provide a semblance of an explanation for the missing link. If a species of terrestrial vertebrate jumped from tree to tree, or even hovered for a few seconds during its jump, like some flying squirrels, for example, then this species would be the keystone species. Some scientists believe that this famous species had a little skin between its legs, and probably lived in tropical forests. This evolution would have enabled it to protect itself from ground-dwelling predators. If this species did indeed live in tropical forests, this would explain why we have found no fossil evidence of its presence on Earth. For fossilization to be possible, several conditions must be met. Immediately after death, the body must be buried under sediment, silt, or sand. Otherwise, the organism will decompose completely. If these initial conditions are met, the skeletal bones will be preserved, the rock will be created, mineralizing the bones, which will become a kind of stone and therefore a fossil. However, these conditions are extremely rare in the forest, which offers us very few fossils. When you think about it, it's quite paradoxical that the environment with the fewest fossils is also the one with the richest biodiversity. Indeed, if we look at today's tropical forests, they are home to the greatest variety of species. So we'll have to wait and see if we can find out more about the origins of pterosaurs. If this question remains unanswered, there are many others about dinosaurs that have been answered. It's time for us to find our dinosaurs and discover the many secrets they have to reveal. We've seen the difference between pterosaurs and dinosaurs, the difference between dinosaurs and marine reptiles, and we've even skimmed the classification of the different dinosaur species. But to really understand dinosaurs, we need to investigate further. A dinosaur is also renowned for being a cold-blooded, ferocious reptile and not very intelligent. But let's dive back into the Mesozoic era in the light of the latest knowledge and find out what life was like for the dinosaurs. The question of dinosaur body temperature often comes up. Were they cold-blooded or warm-blooded? One might think that these animals were cold-blooded. They are reptiles, so logically we'd compare them to the snake or lizard we know. But on the evolutionary scale, dinosaurs fall between birds and reptiles, and birds are warm-blooded. So what's really going on with dinosaurs? Research has been carried out recently, and the results are surprising to say the least. Scientists, including paleobiologist Jasmina Wyman from the California Institute of Technology, relied on technology, infrared spectroscopy, to be more precise, that targets the interactions between molecules and light. In other words, the method uses infrared to quantify the number of waste molecules in fossils. Why is this rate important, and what secret does it hold for us? An animal's metabolism essentially boils down to the efficiency with which it converts oxygen into energy. Warm-blooded or endothermic animals have a high metabolic rate. They need to breathe large quantities of oxygen and eat more to maintain their body temperature. Conversely, ectotherms, or cold-blooded animals such as reptiles, have a more moderate activity level and depend on external conditions to maintain their body temperature. In short, they don't bask in the sun for pleasure, but out of necessity. They have a low metabolic rate. The metabolic rate, i.e. the greater or lesser capacity to convert oxygen into energy for life, is therefore the most convincing indicator of body temperature. The use of oxygen in an organism leaves traces. Technology allows us to detect these traces on fossils. These traces, in the form of bone remnants, can be detected using infrared light. We can now study metabolism from a new angle and calculate the metabolic rate, even in animals that disappeared millions of years ago. Once this rate has been calculated, we still can't determine the body temperature of the fossilized animal. This data must be compared with other verified and validated data to establish a scale of comparison. Based on this scale of magnitude, established on all the animals we know today, and by comparing these data, we can deduce the animal's body temperature. And dinosaurs were warm-blooded. At least most of them were. Of the two major groups of dinosaurs we mentioned earlier, the ornithischians included some cold-blooded specimens, such as the Triceratops. But its large ruff undoubtedly helped to regulate its temperature. This may also be the case for Stegosaurus, with its spine, which also had a low metabolic rate. They were massive but slow herbivores. By contrast, the other group, the Saurischians, the most numerous in terms of species, and above all offspring, like the T-Rex for example, were essentially warm-blooded. Reconstructing the biology and physiology of extinct animals is one of the most difficult things to do in paleontology. This study adds a fundamental piece of the puzzle to our understanding of evolution. Their body temperature sheds light on their lifestyle and needs. The discovery that most dinosaurs were warm-blooded is a small revolution in the world of paleobiology research. We now know that dinosaurs were warm-blooded animals, but they were also oviparous. In other words, their mode of reproduction was through the egg. The amniotic egg has turned biological evolution on its head. Until the beneficial protection provided by the egg, we had to fight to survive. For the first few billion years, life was only able to establish itself in an aquatic environment. Water provided lift, but on land, surrounded only by air, it wasn't the same. The skeleton had to strengthen, solidify, and consolidate. The skin had to become thicker, and the mode of reproduction had to adapt. While some animals, notably reptiles, acclimatized to life on land, reproduction is more complicated. These animals had to lay their eggs in water. The egg is still fragile. It doesn't take much for life to hatch. Without a shell or protective membrane, out of the water it dries out and shatters the life it harbors. Over time, the amniotic egg makes its appearance, and this changes many things. The shell prevents evaporation of the water inside, while allowing gaseous exchanges inside. There's an internal membrane, the amnion, in which a liquid, the amniotic fluid, bathes. This liquid is precious. It protects the future little one. We used to think that dinosaurs were cold-blooded because we compared them to reptiles. To find out how long it takes dinosaurs to incubate eggs, we compared them to the birds they are closest to, which also lay eggs. By comparison, scientists estimated incubation times for dinosaurs at between 11 and 85 days. But this average is about to be called into question by a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences and carried out in the USA. Darla Zelenitsky, assistant professor of geosciences at the University of Calgary in Florida, and her team of researchers took a close look at the embryos made available to them. They were able to analyze an egg of Protoceratops, a small herbivorous dinosaur of the Ceratopsian family that lived in the Upper Cretaceous. Its size is comparable to that of a sheep. The embryo studied came from an egg weighing around 200 grams. Another embryo analyzed in the same study was that of a huge fossil of Hypocrosaurus, a duck-billed dinosaur whose egg weighed over 4 kilos. It looks like a basketball. This is hardly surprising when you consider that the size of an adult Hypocrosaurus is estimated at between 9 and 10 meters, or 33 feet long, and its mass at between 2.5 and 4 tons. What will the researchers analyze in the embryos to learn more about the incubation period? Well, they'll be looking at the teeth, as they hold all the answers. Teeth contain a wealth of information. For this study, the scientists are particularly interested in the growth lines of teeth. In fact, they function much like the rings on the stumps of a tree. Analysis of the dentition of these two embryos revealed that the incubation period was much longer than previously thought. This time, dinosaurs are closer to primitive reptiles than to birds. Protoceratops had an incubation period of at least 3 months, while Hypocrosaurus was probably over 6 months. This long period before the eggs hatched is probably one of the possible answers to why they became extinct. Indeed, during the climatic upheavals and the Cretaceous crisis, such a long incubation period may have been a serious handicap to the survival and perpetuation of the species. However, it's not for lack of trying on the part of the parents to protect their eggs and juveniles. After the egg, it's time to talk about parenthood. Were dinosaurs only ferocious, savage, and bloodthirsty beasts? Here again, studies reveal some surprising facts about these animals from another age. Some fossil remains even suggest quite the opposite. Dinosaurs were capable of fiercely defending their young, designing nests, educating, and passing on knowledge. The Protoceratops we mentioned earlier, a small herbivorous dinosaur with a duck-like beak, defended its eggs and nest with great fervor. It's a small herbivore and not well equipped for attack, but it doesn't give up. Using his beak and massive head, we can imagine him trying to ward off this velociraptor. The two adversaries, one fighting for the survival of his young, the other for his own survival, will both die fighting and end up buried by a sandstorm. At least, that's what the remains of their bones, intertwined with each other, have revealed. This story is far from being an isolated one among dinosaurs. Psittacosaurus fossils may also bear witness to the parental and benevolent spirit of dinosaurs. Paleontologists have found a single Psittacosaurus surrounded by 34 small dinosaurs clustered in a circle. Very little is known about their deaths. What we do know is that it was quick and took place in the midst of activity. At least that's what the positions in which the dinosaurs were found suggest. But what really interests us here is the large number of hatchlings and the presence of a single adult. This fossil configuration resembles a kind of dinosaur nursery. An adult plays the role of nanny, protecting the group's young. It's still too early to say, but it's possible that other dinosaur parents may have taken advantage of this nanny's help to fetch food for themselves and their young. Oviraptors, on the other hand, settled into their nests in the manner of the birds we know today, their bodies positioned in the center of the nest, and their arms stretched over the eggs to protect them. Fossils here once again confirm the protective nature of another member of the dinosaur family. In the 1970s, a gigantic fossilized nest was discovered that had been home to hundreds of Maiasaurus specimens over 80 million years ago. Jack Horner, the paleontologist who discovered them, studied the fossils with great care. Their position, their configuration in relation to each other, the estimated age of each one, everything has been examined with a fine-tooth comb. This time, the clues reveal that dinosaurs were not only able to protect eggs, but also to play a protective role after they hatched. Indeed, they also looked after their young once they were born. But how can we be sure? Well, from the fossils found in and around these nests, we can see that there are several young of different ages in the same nest, and traces of fossilized vegetation. This means that Maiasauras not only fed their babies directly in the nest, but also cared for both newborns and juveniles. Maiasaurus weren't the only ones to care for their young over a long period of time. Scientists have been able to prove through fossil analysis that Psittacosaurus and Massapondylus, for example, were also very involved parents. Among herbivores, we have been able to study footprints. This evidence is invaluable. They tell us how they moved. Did they move slowly or quickly, in groups or alone? But footprint studies can also tell us how the group itself functioned. Indeed, scientists believe that some herbivorous dinosaurs moved in herds to be alert to attacks. Numerous footprints have been found, enabling us to analyze the herd's workings in detail. It has been observed that young dinosaurs were placed among the adults, and that these herds were adept at long seasonal migrations. But there's another area where dinosaurs are just as surprising, that of intelligence. The intelligence of dinosaurs has long been the subject of debate. In the collective imagination, dinosaurs were simple reptiles, a little silly, not very bright, or even a little simple. In other words, they weren't intelligent. Why should we think so? This idea stems from the size of the dinosaur's brain, which was not very large. The most commonly used method of measuring intelligence is to compare brain size to body size, known as the encephalization coefficient. In many dinosaurs, notably the T-Rex, this EQ, or encephalization coefficient, was low. It was therefore thought that dinosaurs were not very intellectually developed, or thoughtful beings. Some of them stood out from the crowd, notably Troodon, reputed for many years to be the most intelligent dinosaur known, with an EQ of 6. Raptors rivaled them with an EQ of 5.8. To give you an element of comparison, humans have an EQ of 7.44. That's the highest. With humans at the top of the chain, it was felt that this method of calculation was a good way of assessing intelligence and making it measurable and comparable. Thanks to the fossils found, scientists were able to calculate this encephalic coefficient by comparing the size of the body with the size of the cavity housing the brain. But this method has since been called into question. Chimpanzees are renowned for their intelligence, as are many great apes, which are capable of creating tools for opening fruit or finding insects in stumps or anthills. They are also able to communicate and learn. Numerous experiments have been carried out, revealing the surprising abilities of these animals. However, if we look at the EQ, the chimpanzee would be an idiot, as it barely reaches 2.49. The limitations of this method are clearly evident. Raptors and Troodons may have been highly intelligent, but that doesn't mean that others weren't. Still less that we should generalize this lack of intelligence about all dinosaurs. Some might even surprise you. The Tyrannosaurus, for example, has long been lodged in the idiot category, and this is far from the case. In fact, Brazilian neuroscientist Susana Herculano Hazel has managed to count the number of neurons in the Tyrannosaurus brain. It turns out that he had no less than 3 billion. Admittedly, that's fewer than the human brain's 80 billion neurons, but it still puts it somewhere between the chimpanzee and the baboon. This means that the T-Rex was at least as intelligent as today's primates. How did the scientist manage to count the neurons without having the dinosaur's brain? While bones fossilize, brains do not. Susana relied on a law of scale. This law of scale has been consolidated year after year through research, studies, and the discovery of a very large number of animals. Thanks to this scale, which has been greatly enriched in recent years in terms of data, we know that in birds from the smallest hummingbird to the largest ostrich, via the hen and the eagle, the number of neurons is directly linked to the mass of the brain, itself directly linked to the mass of the body. In other words, we can know the number of neurons per gram of brain. This calculation is true for birds, but also for reptiles and crocodiles. The scale is different, but works for all of them. The statistical analyses carried out by the researcher show that for theropods, the relationship between body mass and brain mass follows the same law as for birds. This similarity could perhaps be explained by the fact that modern birds are descended from dinosaurs. What's certain in any case is that the T-Rex was far from stupid. It would have been capable not only of making tools, but also of passing on its knowledge. This process and the various data collected also allow us to update our knowledge in another area. Age is closely linked to the number of neurons. In other words, we can estimate the lifespan of different dinosaur species. We also know, based on what we've seen in reptiles, mammals, and birds today, that larger animals generally live longer, and that carnivores often have shorter lives than herbivores. While some dinosaurs measuring less than a meter only live for 5 or 6 years, dinosaurs such as the Brontosaurus, for example, could have lived for almost 80 years. As for the T-Rex, its life expectancy is estimated at between 25 and 40 years. Given its longevity and intelligence, the Tyrannosaurus could well have passed on its knowledge to its descendants. But it's not only in the field of dinosaur intelligence that we've strayed from the truth, either through lack of knowledge or simply by incorporating received ideas as real facts. Dinosaurs have a bad image. They're ferocious, aggressive, and bloodthirsty. As you can imagine, the truth is far more complex than that. It's the brain of the Thachodontosaurus antiquus that may just change the way people think about the subject. Dinosaurs could also be social animals. The remains of Thachodontosaurus antiquus were unearthed a long time ago. They were preserved in the laboratories of the University of Bristol and hadn't been studied since, at least not with today's technology. The scanner and various 3D imaging tools made it possible to produce a cast and shed light on the inner ear. They observed the existence of 2 large floccular lobes. Located at the back of the brain, they play an important role in balance. Their large size in this dinosaur suggests that it was probably bipedal, contrary to what was previously thought. The researchers were also able to reconstruct the anatomy of the inner ears of Thachodontosaurus and compare them with those of other dinosaurs. According to them, its hearing frequency was relatively high, enabling it to hear the sounds and cries emitted by various animals, including those of its fellow dinosaurs. A clue to possible sound-driven social interactions. So dinosaurs were intelligent and could even be social animals. We've talked about species diversity, lifestyle, reproduction, behavior, and even intelligence. But we've forgotten to talk about their habitat. Where do dinosaurs live? On Pangea. Yes, but after that? Did they only survive in the middle of a vast swamp? What were the different environments inhabited by dinosaurs? Dinosaurs lived all over the Earth, but some lived in very specific regions, as is the case today for many of our modern-day animals. In the course of their research, paleontologists have been able to create maps of the world by imagining where dinosaurs might have lived. They draw on their knowledge of dinosaurs, animals, and biology, and on their interpretation of the remains and fossils found. These maps evolve over the millennia, following new geographical layouts and climatic changes, for example. The Triassic period, between 252 and 201 million years ago, was marked not only by the birth of the dinosaurs, but also by a very particular configuration of the Earth. Our planet is made up of a single continent, a single unique landmass, Pangea. Dinosaurs cohabited and evolved on this unique land, yet some species never met. If the land is unique, the climate is not. Let's start at the center of Pangea. Here it would appear that the interior was completely dry, enclosed behind massive mountain ranges that blocked out all moisture. The climate is almost desert-like. Near the equator, the climate is quite different, with lush, humid tropical forests. These may resemble the jungles found in the Amazon, for example. Other regions are more temperate. In short, the biotope is very different from one place to another on Pangea. Each species has made its home in an environment suited to its own needs. Each species is equipped to adapt to the specific conditions of its environment. It would therefore be wrong to claim that all dinosaurs lived in swamps or rainforests. Dinosaur fossils have been found in areas thought to have been lake shores, lagoons, swamps, deserts, temperate forests, savannas, and plains. Dinosaurs occupied every one of these environments. Another surprising fact: their shelter. We always imagine dinosaurs near a body of water bordered by a jungle, or in the middle of a plain with mountains in the background. But dinosaurs, or at least some of them, were capable of making their own shelters. In 2007, paleontologists found fossils in an astonishing place, at least according to what we knew until then. The remains of 3 dinosaurs, 1 adult and 2 juveniles, were found in the chamber of a burrow. This means that the dinosaur had dug a tunnel more than 2 meters long, and at its deepest point had created a chamber in which its 2 young lived. This time, the fossils reveal a burrowing dinosaur. It's an Eryctodromaeus cubicularis. This herbivore was equipped not only to run, but also to dig. The snout is robust, with fused premaxillae. The shoulder blade is strong, and the vertebrae near the pelvis are fused. So this little dinosaur seems well equipped to dig energetically. But its 2 long legs probably also made it a fast runner. As you can see, dinosaurs are truly amazing animals, and with each new discovery, they never cease to amaze us. Yet 66 million years ago, these impressive charismatic creatures disappeared from our planet. Let's take a look back at how long they occupied the Earth and find out more about their extinction. Dinosaurs reigned supreme on Earth for over 165 million years. But is it really a reign at all? Did dinosaurs live alone on Earth during this long Mesozoic period? Dinosaurs reigned for 165 million years and diversified greatly. In fact, there were a great many dinosaurs roaming the continent. There were herbivores and carnivores, hunters, gatherers, burrowers, bipeds, quadrupeds, feathered and scaled, small and fast, heavy and slow, big and long. In short, the dinosaur family grew and developed. Today, Some 1,200 species are known to us from fossil finds, but these are only the species that, thanks to a great deal of luck, have left fossils behind to testify to their presence. The vast majority have left no trace of their passage, simply because the conditions for fossilization were not present. This figure is therefore only a sample of the number of species that actually existed. If dinosaurs were numerous and occupied much of the continent, were they the kings of the Mesozoic? Were they the only species to live on Earth? We already know that marine reptiles and pterosaurs, the flying reptiles, were also present. But they weren't the only contemporaries of the dinosaurs. One might think that at the time of the land of the dinosaurs, mammals had not been able to find their place, that they had waited until after the Great Extinction to thrive. Researchers now claim that this is not quite true. Dinosaurs and mammals, or more precisely their ancestors, the Mammaliforms, appeared at virtually the same time. In fact, Mesozoic mammals were far more diverse than previously thought. In fact, there were quite a few of them living alongside the dinosaurs. Some mammals were, of course, the prey of the most powerful or fastest carnivorous dinosaurs. But the predator-prey relationship wasn't always as straightforward as you might think. The discovery of one fossil in particular proves that not all mammals were at the mercy of the dinosaurs. Quite the contrary. Repenomamus gigantic is a large mammal from the Mesozoic era, probably the largest of its time. Paleontologists have studied a fossil of this specimen found in present-day China. To understand the lifestyle and diet of this Repenomamus gigantic, paleobiologists analyzed its stomach contents, i.e. the traces of elements still present in its stomach. After studying the stomach contents, it turned out to be the remains of a Psittacosaurus and other reptiles. This mammal was therefore a carnivore, a good shoemaker, and didn't hesitate to take on dinosaurs. This example of carnivores should not, however, be taken as representative of the majority. Before the extinction of the dinosaurs, mammals were mostly nocturnal and insectivorous. Perhaps this is what enabled them to survive the crisis that marked the end of the Cretaceous. David Grossnickel, a researcher at the University of Washington in the USA, has carried out a number of studies on the subject. According to the work carried out by his team, mammals underwent 3 major evolutionary radiations over the course of their history. This enabled them to adapt to their environment and new ecological niches. They prospered and diversified. The new species that appeared were able to climb, slide, or dig burrows. Their diet shifted towards meat, leaves, and crustaceans, and at least 2 of these evolutionary radiations would have occurred, one at the beginning of the Jurassic, between 190 and 163 million years ago, and the other during the Upper Cretaceous, around 90 million years ago, at a time when dinosaurs were still thriving on Earth. Dinosaurs, too, underwent significant biological evolution and diversification. We've clearly seen great diversification and species evolution, both physically and in terms of intellectual and social capacities. If both families are thriving, this indicates that cohabitation between these 2 large groups was possible. Yet we are now approaching the end of the dinosaurs. 66 million years ago, they finally disappeared. Are mammals to blame? Is it a failure of evolution? In the collective imagination, all dinosaurs died out suddenly when this group of species was at its peak. They disappeared following an unprecedented cataclysm. So many errors in so few sentences. No, the dinosaurs didn't all disappear. No, not at their peak. And no, not suddenly. And finally, no, not following an unprecedented cataclysm. Mass extinctions have been numerous. The Tertiary Cretaceous crisis was significant, with 50% of species extinct. But nothing like the Permian-Triassic crisis, which wiped out nearly 95% of the Earth's species. Secondly, none of these extinctions were so sudden and violent as to wipe out all species in just a few days. They were long periods of crisis, extending over thousands or even millions of years. Changes in temperature, very hot or very cold, changes in air composition, or even changes in ocean acidity, if they are spread over the whole globe and are too rapid for living beings to adapt, then lead to the onset of a crisis. It's gradual, but the impact is inevitable. Thousands of species are doomed to extinction. Scientists accept that the Cretaceous crisis had several origins. As we saw with the crisis at the end of the Permian, the causes of these crises are often multifaceted and marked by changes on a global scale. Traces of very strong volcanic activity can be found in the traps of the Deccan in present-day India. But during the same period, 65 million years ago, there was another major event that forever marked the history of our planet. A meteorite impacted the Earth in Mexico at Chicxulub. The meteorite measured between 10 and 80 kilometers, or between 6 and 50 miles in diameter. An impact with a celestial object of such magnitude and speed causes irreparable damage and impacts all ecosystems. Permanent volcanic eruptions and the dust raised by the meteorite upset the order of things. The opaque atmosphere would have limited the sun's rays. Plants could no longer benefit from photosynthesis, their vital source of energy. Herbivores without vegetation were deprived of food and died in turn. Then came the carnivores, who also had no food to survive on. According to most scientific data, this extinction occurred very rapidly, in geological terms. The immediate and short-term effects of the impact, such as global fires, tsunamis, a prolonged night caused by aerosols and soot in the atmosphere, and a drastic drop in temperatures, are thought to have been catastrophic for many forms of life. This was followed by a long-term greenhouse effect due to the gases released on impact, causing global warming. The exact speed of the extinction is still debated, but many studies suggest that it could have taken place within a few years to several thousand years after the impact. Some species survived the upheaval. For example, small insectivorous animals, scavengers, tortoises, sharks, crocodiles, and many others survived. All this took place 66 million years ago, during the heyday of the dinosaurs. Well, not quite their heyday. In fact, it turns out that numerous studies carried out at the end of the Cretaceous period reveal that dinosaurs were in decline. Numbers, particularly of large specimens, were falling dramatically. Diversity was also declining. All this means that their demise was probably irretrievable. The explanation is still unclear. Some scientists believe that the fragmentation of the continents following the breakup of Pangea worked to their disadvantage. Climate change modifying the climate and flora, rising sea levels, and other phenomena put large animals at a disadvantage in these smaller spaces. The emergence and diversification of flowering plants, notably angiosperms, may also have altered terrestrial ecosystems. While some dinosaurs were able to adapt to these new food sources, others, particularly the large specialized herbivores, may have been disadvantaged. However, it would be completely wrong to say that dinosaurs have disappeared. In fact, dinosaurs have not completely disappeared. That's right, their descendants still live among us, and they have managed to establish themselves in the four corners of the world with great ease. We meet many of them every day, without even imagining that their history goes so far back in time. I'm talking about birds. Indeed, the theropod family has survived the crisis. Remember, we talked about this family when we discussed the classification of dinosaurs? Theropods include tyrannosaurs, velociraptors, allosaurs, and even birds. Another important nuance: birds are not representatives of the dinosaurs as you might think, but dinosaurs in their own right, forming one of the theropod families. The story of the dinosaurs is decidedly longer than we could have imagined, and far more complex than we thought. They are extraordinary animals whose study continues to surprise us to this day. Each new discovery is a small paleontological or biological revolution. So there's no end in sight to our journey into the land of the dinosaurs. We still have much to learn from these animals of another age. Going back in time, back to the past, yesterday, a century ago, 4 billion years ago. All these periods are part of the past, some of them so far away. Time passes slowly for some, and with dizzying speed for others. Time is measurable. We speak of hours, minutes, seconds, and even hundredths of a second in sporting competitions. We count the years that pass, the time that elapses. We study centuries and epochs. And yet, even if mankind is capable of measuring time, he is limited to his conception of the future. There comes a time when numbers beyond 6 zeros have trouble echoing in our minds. Elapsed time is too distant and too vast. It is so distant from us that it is beyond human comprehension and understanding. When the historical period is counted in millions of years, it's hard to get our minds around such an amplitude of time. These figures are far too large for our brains to assimilate. This is why we no longer speak in years but in geological periods. These different geological and temporal phases are more meaningful to the human mind. Since the invention of writing, just over 3,000 years ago, researchers, experts, and historians have relied on written, tangible, verifiable, and comparable evidence. Art, tools, clothing, kitchen utensils, and weapons are all objects that can tell the story of their owner at a given time and place. They have enabled us to go back in time and discover the way of life of early man, for example. But long before you were born, long before the birth of man, our Earth was already alive. Animals and plants populated the continents and oceans hundreds of millions of years before we did. When we go back that far in time, only the Earth can tell us about these past adventures. No book, no manuscript, no object, no painting can tell the story of the past to mankind's quest for knowledge. It's in the Earth that the vestiges of the past are buried. Each new discovery by archaeologists and paleontologists reveals a new facet of the great mystery of life and the history of our world. This is why the different phases of life on our planet are closely linked to the Earth's geology. They have made it possible to design a timescale over long periods. They make it possible to retrace the past from the birth of the Earth to the present day, over almost 4.5 billion years. Geologists have constructed this stratigraphic timescale in which each phase is marked by a precise event. An international commission is updating this geological scale as scientific advances and discoveries are made. For greater clarity, it has been divided into periods, eras, and eons. This hierarchical structure makes it easier to assimilate events and provides a better overview of the most important events in our history. When we talk about original flora and fauna, we're mainly talking about the Phanerozoic eon, which stretches from 542 million years ago to the present day. You're probably familiar with the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous eras. You may even have heard a lot about the Cambrian. To help you keep track of time, here are the main elements you need to know. They form the stratigraphic scale. The long Phanerozoic period you know is the last eon of the scale. It includes the Paleozoic era, the Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, Carboniferous, and Permian periods. This is followed by the Mesozoic era and the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods. Finally, from the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs some 65.5 million years ago to the present day, we speak of the Cenozoic era, which successively comprises the Paleogene, Neogene, and Quaternary periods. These different periods are rich in history. The geology, flora, and fauna are amazing and fascinating to study. But even if these periods are very distant by human standards, they are, after all, very recent in terms of the Earth and terrestrial life itself. But today, we're going to go much further back in our history, long before the first placental mammals and the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs of the Cretaceous, long before the division of Pangea, the first flowering plants, and the first birds of the Jurassic, long before the first dinosaurs and oviparous mammals of the Triassic. A real leap back in time, and beyond anything you seem to know, beyond anything you can imagine. We'll go back to the Permian and its unprecedented extinction, the Carboniferous and its population of giant insects, its first big trees, and the appearance of reptiles, the Devonian and its amphibians, the Silurian and its first land plants, the Ordovician and its invertebrates, and even the Cambrian, which left such a mark with its major changes and its first algae. Let's go back to the genesis of life to witness its birth, but also its evolution. For over 540 million years, we have lived in one of the richest eons the blue planet has ever known, the Phanerozoic. But our planet is much older than that. These 540 million years are, after all, only a tiny part of its life, representing just 1/8 of its history. How about starting the story where it all really began? The Cambrian represents such a major change for our world that in order to refer to the entire preceding period, we have chosen to call this eon the Precambrian. What you may not know is that the Precambrian is such a long and rich period that it constitutes a super eon in itself. The Precambrian super eon is subdivided into 3 eons: the Hadean, the Archean, and the Proterozoic. While the Proterozoic is the eon of particular interest to us in terms of evolution, let's take a quick look at the 2 preceding eons. They will undoubtedly give you a better understanding of the changes that take place during the Proterozoic. We'll be there 4.5 billion years before today. This period of our history goes so far back in time that it's almost impossible to have a realistic representation based on factual evidence. Only a few minerals, zircons dating from this period, are known today. Thanks to our current technologies and the few elements we have in our procession, experts have been able to put forward hypotheses on the Hadean period based on a theoretical approach, but also on elements of comparison inspired by other planets. The Hadean is a time interval that begins with the accretion of our planet, i.e., the capture of matter by a star under the effect of gravitation. In other words, it corresponds to the birth of our planet, Earth. The Hadean began 4.568 billion years ago. Compared to the extent of the stratigraphic scale, this is a short period. The Hadean ends around 4 billion years ago, which corresponds to the age of the oldest known rocks. But it was the very first eon on the Earth's geological timescale, and many events took place over a short period of time. As you can imagine, conditions were extreme and hostile to all forms of life. This is why, in 1972, American geologist Preston Cloud first named this chronological and geological period the Hadean, in reference to the Greek god of the underworld, Hades. The most characteristic events of the Hadean are the separation of metal and silicate. The denser metal migrated towards the planet's interior to form the core, while the less dense nitrogen and CO2, with small amounts of methane and ammonia. It could be defined as a primitive atmosphere. All this suggests that the Earth was then an azoic planet, i.e., an environment with no traces of animal or plant life. It's very difficult to know more about this period, since rocks dating back to the Hadean are almost non-existent. However, a few deposits dating back 3.9 billion years could point to prebiotic activity, and we don't know whether this might have begun a few million years earlier during the Hadean. It's on this unsolved scientific enigma, which leaves an extraordinary field of possibilities, that I suggest we continue our journey, leaving behind the Hadean and embarking on a new era, the Archean. The Archean era began around 4 billion years ago. Not chosen at random by the International Stratigraphic Commission, this is the age of the oldest rocks we know. No known rock predates 4 billion years. A fundamental change took place between the Archean the second era of the Precambrian and the Proterozoic, the last era of this super eon. The result is a new way of functioning for our planet. To understand these new elements of the Proterozoic, you need to go back to the source of this phenomenon. You'll then be able to better understand and perceive the various consequences. Here we are, at the dawn of the Archean, just 4 billion years ago. This long period lasted nearly 1.5 billion years. The Archean was marked by intense magmatic activity, leading to the extraction of almost 3/4 of the volume of the continental crust from the mantle. We talked about the Earth's crust during the Hadean, and you'll remember that while it was solid, it was still rather thin. During this new era, it develops and thickens. While our continental crust is mainly granitic and covered with sedimentary rock, this was not at all the case 2 to 4 billion years ago. Sedimentary rock existed very little, if at all. At that time, magmatic rock was predominant. Another key feature of the Archean era was plate tectonics. Plate movements are still with us today. Traces of these movements can be found at specific points around the globe. In a continental collision, the overriding plate may advance several hundred kilometers onto the plate being overridden. It will then push shreds of the overlapped crust and form what are known as thrust sheets. Surprisingly, this type of movement was already present nearly 4 billion years ago. The same traces of thrust sheets can be found in rocks dating from the Archean period. The only significant difference between yesterday's movements and those of today is that billions of years ago, the plates were much smaller, only 100 kilometers or about 50 miles. At this stage in the life of our young planet, the Earth's crust had cooled sufficiently for the first continents to begin forming. These movements will give rise to another decisive phenomenon for our planet. Thanks to these plate movements, we see strong mantle activity and intense periods of erosion and alteration. These phenomena, coupled with other events, produce large quantities of CO2 during this period, which in turn contributes to the greenhouse effect. This greenhouse effect keeps the Earth's temperature above 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit. For life to flourish, the Earth must be sufficiently hospitable. Extreme temperatures, either too hot or too cold, would eliminate any hope of life. Let's leave the atmosphere behind and continue our exploration in search of clues to the appearance of this possible life. The Earth's internal activity is far more intense than it is today, and the heat in its entrails much higher. Magmatic oceans, melts, and other terrestrial phenomena favor the appearance of rocks that require high temperatures, such as comatite. Today, with its lower internal heat, the Earth could no longer produce this type of rock. Speaking of these rocks, I told you earlier that they are the oldest known. You can see them in specific places around the globe, including Greenland, Western Australia, and South Africa. They offer a completely different terrestrial landscape from what we know. Gray rocks, belts of green rocks, a landscape almost from another world. If it weren't for the presence of water all over the Earth's surface, you'd probably be mistaken. But if you look closely, you can see the moon on the horizon. You'll notice that it's much closer to the Earth than usual. The rocks you see submerged in the water are stromatolites. You can also see an active volcano spewing fiery clouds of dust a little further away. But what really catches your eye here is the water and the presence of carbon. Indeed, these two elements are essential to our quest for knowledge about the genesis of the very first cells. They are the protagonists in the history of life on Earth. According to scientists such as Christophe Tomaso of the Institut de Physique du Globe de Paris and James Casting of the University of Pennsylvania, water, oxygen, and carbon are the most convincing indications of possible life on a planet. It is through the chemistry of water and carbon that life could hatch. For this to happen, water must be stable on the surface. As for the carbon atom, it is one of the atoms most conducive to the establishment of numerous bonds and thus to the formation of long, complex molecules with multiple properties. We have thus assembled the essential criteria required for the birth of life. Water is plentiful here, and the carbon released by terrestrial activities is produced in abundance, while these stromatolites are proof of the presence of oxygen. These rocks are banded iron formations, i.e., iron oxidized by the presence of oxygen. We still don't know for sure where the first forms of life appeared. Nevertheless, many scientists have put forward theories on the subject. Some believe that life emerged in hydrothermal springs at the bottom of the oceans, while others favor the possibility that the first organisms evolved in small hot pools near volcanoes. What we do know is that it was present in the Archean period. I think it's time for you at last to know how it all began. Here we are. How did the very first life appear on Earth? According to some of the experiments carried out over the last few decades, notably Miller's, life could have hatched in a primordial soup, in small hot pools close to volcanoes, for example. How did scientists arrive at this hypothesis? It all began in 1924 with the hypothesis of Russian biochemist Alexander Oparin, according to which the first living cell was born in a primordial soup. This soup is rich in carbon compounds synthesized in the atmosphere from methane. Stanley Lloyd Miller, an American biologist now considered the father of the chemistry of the origins of life on Earth, continued his research and explored the hypothesis of this primordial soup. He developed a mixture of methane, hydrogen, ammonia, and water, similar to what might have been found in a pond during the Archean period. In this way, he attempted to simulate the conditions that would have prevailed after the formation of the Earth's crust. Miller enclosed these gases in a balloon and subjected them to ultraviolet radiation, similar to that of the young sun, as well as to electrical discharges similar to those that might have occurred naturally, such as during thunderstorms. After a few days, the chemist noticed a dark deposit forming on the walls of the water-filled balloon. This balloon is a representation of the Earth's ocean. Analysis showed that the balloon contained not only formaldehyde and hydrocyanic acid, two molecules that play a key role in the synthesis of organic molecules of biological interest, but also small quantities of amino acids, notably glycine. Prebiotic chemistry could therefore have been at the origin of life on Earth. It was during the Archean, and perhaps even as early as the end of the Hadean, that bits of life, the very first cells, were able to hatch. All conditions were present in this primordial soup. Then, The nature and movement of the water undoubtedly favored the development of these bacteria in the four corners of the globe. Numerous variants of Miller's experiment have since emerged as knowledge of the atmosphere and geology during the Archean period has evolved. These have helped to underpin our knowledge of the first life cells. Other discoveries, this time from outside the Earth, have led to the realization that elements favoring the creation of cells may have come from the universe. At least that's what the study of the Murchison meteorite, which fell in Australia in 1969, has revealed. It contains over 70 different amino acids, 8 of which are used in the composition of proteins. Similar elements have also been found in micrometeorites found in Antarctic ice. This time, analysis suggests that huge quantities of complex carbonaceous matter were delivered to our young Earth just over 4 billion years ago. Scientists have also discovered that the gases escaping from underwater hydrothermal springs contain hydrogen and CO2, generating long chains of carbon and hydrogen. These hydrothermal springs would therefore be synonymous with the source of life, since they constitute the first steps towards membrane synthesis. This discovery brings us to our second hypothesis, undoubtedly one of the most probable in the light of our current knowledge. Here again, it's very difficult to be absolutely certain about the origins of life, the course of evolution, and the processes that triggered the birth of the very first cells. The laws of physics, chemistry, and even biology cannot fully solve the mystery. I'd like to give you an outline of one of the theories put forward, which is certainly as close to reality as we can get, based on the various experiments carried out and the chemical laws we know today. The origin of the first cell would ultimately be a succession of interactions and reactions. If we accept the hypothesis of hydrothermal springs, here's what would have happened. Hydrothermal springs are hot water springs found at ocean ridges at depths ranging from 500 to 5,000 meters, or about 1,600 and 1,650 feet. They are found where two tectonic plates diverge and magma fills the openings as it solidifies. The rock then cools and cracks. These hydrothermal springs form rocks. They are not smooth and totally hermetic. They are stirred up by hot water rising from the earth and cold water rushing in. The rocks have a spongy feel, even though they are very hard and solid. If you magnify part of this rock, you'll see that there are cavities of sorts. These are little cells. They make the rock permeable and are partly made up of iron sulfide. Iron sulfide is an essential element in our equation. It promotes and accelerates certain chemical reactions. As you'll see in a few minutes, life is ultimately a succession of chemical, physical, and biological reactions. Even if you can't really see it with the naked eye, elements such as ammonia, hydrogen, hydrogen sulfide, methane, and phosphorus compounds rise up from the depths of the earth. Within these permeable rocks, acidic seawater flows intersect and intermingle with alkaline freshwater flows. This mixture of seawater and freshwater, as well as elements brought up from the earth, will react when they come into contact with each other. Each cell stores these substances and preserves them at a high temperature. Don't forget that we're standing on the edge of a hydrothermal vent. Heat favors certain chemical reactions. This is the case here. The cells are like little test tubes. This high temperature contact between 50 and 70 degrees Celsius, or 122 and 158 degrees Fahrenheit, leads to an initial chemical reaction that releases energy and produces new substances. And not just any substances. Sugar, amino acids, and even nucleic acid bases are born. In our rock test tubes, these new elements are bathed in a mixture of water and preserved at an ideal temperature. This allows them to continue their chemical marriage. After a series of successive reactions, the amino acids bind together to form short chains. These short chains, known as peptides, are one of the prerequisites for making proteins. We're slowly approaching the first living cell. As for sugar, it binds with phosphate and one of the elements present in nucleic acid to create what are known as nucleotides. Nucleotides are one of the building blocks of RNA, one of the building blocks of proteins. Another phenomenon is at work in the molecules in these rock cavities. At the same time, other chemical reactions produce DNA. DNA is more stable than RNA, making it easier to store genetic information, something that hasn't really been the case until now. These new molecules are still very primitive. They're a blueprint for more complex life. For the time being, they are still unable to move and remain trapped in their stone caves. Nevertheless, they are already capable of reproducing even beyond their rocky chamber. They can transmit their genetic information to the neighboring cavity and proliferate all along the rock. Precisely when, why, and how? We don't really know. But it turns out that these molecules are also capable of producing fats or lipids. These elements are hydrophobic and cling to the rock walls. Gradually, the lipids spread out over the wall, forming a kind of organic cell membrane. These new abilities are recorded in the DNA so that they can be reproduced. But they are still very fragile. New proteins have been grafted onto these membranes to promote and accelerate certain chemical reactions. They are now capable of producing a cell envelope. This makes them more robust and resistant. At this stage, there are two possibilities for these first molecules to become archaea or bacteria. The cells of these two life forms are then made up of a permeable envelope, enabling them to activate certain chemical processes. But they also have an outer wall, an outer envelope that protects them. Inside, they can produce more complex molecules and record them in their DNA. After a long and laborious chemical process, life can finally emerge. But isn't there a question on your mind? Do you remember that these archaea and bacteria are trapped in rock cavities? How did we come to have life in the four corners of the world and in every nook and cranny of our oceans? Locked in this way, they couldn't move around and expand their territory. Nothing is less certain. But it is assumed the walls of the thermal vent rocks collapsed or cracked, perhaps after internal Earth activity, which would have released them. Their tough, permeable outer walls then play an essential role. They enable archaea and bacteria, once they have escaped from their protective incubator, to settle somewhere near the chimneys. A new rock, a crevice, a crack. They take up residence in a new place that offers them hospitality. Sterile and devoid of any living form, this new environment is then colonized by life. For these organisms, conquering new territories means adapting to new environments and evolving. It's the beginning of a new era in which biodiversity is in its infancy. Armed with this knowledge, you're ready to discover more about the evolution of life on Earth. Do you remember, before tackling the evolution of the very first bacteria, what led us to analyze the cavities of these hydrothermal vent rocks? It was the stromatolites. We were faced with a landscape completely different from what you can see through your living room window. Everything seemed uninhabited. The landscape before us was nothing but rock and water. I'd like to come back to the grayish rocks we encountered earlier. You need to take a closer look at these stromatolites. They're very special, you'll see. This kind of gelatin is actually half living, half rocky. I know, it's quite incredible and rather surprising. Gelatin is made up of bacterial filaments which trap carbon from the air and incorporate it in the form of sediment. This forms the rocky ball you see here. It's through this process that these half-living, half-rocky structures are formed, giving rise to stromatolites. Some of these were discovered 3.5 billion years ago while drilling the craton in Western Australia. A craton in geology is a continental area corresponding to a formerly consolidated zone of the lithosphere. Other, even older stromatolites have been discovered, this time in Greenland. These small geological structures are thought to have resulted from the activity of colonies of aquatic bacteria. Their activity promotes the precipitation of fine films of limestone on the seabed. Over time, these films are superimposed, producing the pointed cone-shaped structures and crushed bumps known as stromatolites. These date back 3.7 billion years. From then on, and for more than 1.5 billion years, life on Earth was exclusively bacterial. The Proterozoic is the third and final period of the Precambrian. It spans almost 2 billion years, from 2.5 billion years ago to 542 million years ago. This eon is divided into three periods. The Paleoproterozoic, from the Greek paleos, meaning ancient, stretches from 2.5 to 1.6 billion years ago. Mesoproterozoic, from the Greek mesos, meaning middle, from 1.6 to 1 billion years ago. Neoproterozoic, from the Greek neos, meaning new, extends from 1 billion years to 542 million years ago. Let's go back to where it all began, at the beginning of the first period that makes up the Proterozoic, the Paleoproterozoic. Here we are, the Paleoproterozoic. There's something that must seem very strange to you right now: the orange atmosphere. According to research carried out by an English university team on marine sediments in southern Africa, 2.5 billion years ago, the atmosphere was unbreathable and orange. This methane fog is undoubtedly partly to blame. Earth looks like Saturn's moon Titan. The temperature at that time was freezing. Between 2.5 and 2 billion years ago, the Earth underwent a major period of glaciation. A few hundred million years later, it would experience others. You're probably cold just looking at these images. It has to be said that temperatures during this period were far from mild. Surface temperatures averaged minus 25 degrees Celsius or minus 13 degrees Fahrenheit. But minus 50 degrees Celsius or minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit are not uncommon in the region. The Siderean, the first period of the Paleoproterozoic, and part of the following period, the Rhyatian, saw one of the most severe ice ages the Earth has ever known. This glaciation, known as the Huronian glaciation, took place between 2.4 billion and 2.1 billion years ago. It was one of the most important glaciations, but also one of the longest, 300 million years. There are currently two hypotheses still under debate as to the cause that led to this glaciation of the Earth. The first involves a reaction between oxygen and methane. This phenomenon, known as great oxidation, transformed methane into carbon dioxide by reacting with methane. This mass-produced carbon dioxide would have produced a greenhouse effect 30 times smaller. Another hypothesis is that volcanoes were dormant for almost 250 million years. With much less carbon dioxide present, the greenhouse effect would have been correspondingly reduced. The Huronian glaciation is not the only natural phenomenon to have marked the Siderean period. At this time, we also speak of banded iron formations, a rather convoluted term to define the birth of iron deposits of a different kind, made possible by the presence of oxygen. Oxygen is present everywhere in the stratigraphic layers of this period. The origin of its presence is undoubtedly the proliferation of blue-green algae. Yes, since our visit to the Archean, things have changed a little in terms of flora and fauna. Bacteria have grown and expanded their territory. The sugar from which they derive their energy has been drastically reduced. The symbiosis they used and the photochemistry that enabled them to survive are no longer possible. So they had to adapt to their new environment and adopt a new way of life using solar energy, photosynthesis, as plants do. This is undoubtedly what led to their confusion and earned them the name of blue-green algae. Until now, our primitive cells drew their energy from chemical substances. These substances are found in abundance, straight from the bowels of the Earth. It's sugar, produced through various chemical reactions, but for a variety of reasons this sugar will one day run out. Bacteria will have to adapt if they are to survive, and that's exactly what they do. They manage to draw their energy not from sugar but from the sun. They use a new mode of operation, photosynthesis. Specific bacterial cells capture the sun's rays. Thanks to this accumulated energy, they are able to break down water into hydrogen and oxygen. This action releases carbon dioxide. The oxygen is released, while the hydrogen and carbon dioxide produce carbohydrates. And these carbohydrates are rich in energy. They're what keep bacteria alive. These photosynthetic cyanobacteria are unicellular, prokaryotic organisms, i.e., their cell structure does not include a nucleus. By using the sun as an energy source to synthesize organic matter, they release oxygen. Lots and lots of oxygen. The first oxygen molecules triggered a series of reactions, bringing about new changes for our planet. Initially, the production of oxygen was offset by the production of iron oxide, and probably had no real impact. But the process soon reached saturation point. There was no longer any reaction to stop the release of oxygen molecules into the air. If the Amazon is the green lung of our planet, the ocean is the blue lung, and the very essence of the air we breathe. It is from the ocean that we still derive much of the oxygen we breathe today. The presence of oxygen in the atmosphere encouraged new transformations in the first living organisms. Hitherto prokaryotic, eukaryotic organisms with well-defined nuclei are now emerging. Genetics adapts to new environmental conditions. Look, here are two algae, two new organisms that symbolize the first steps of evolution. The first is a green algae, of the chlorophytus class. The second is a red algae, of the rhodophytus class. Both use photosynthesis to synthesize organic matter. These multicellular organisms also contribute to the expulsion of oxygen into the atmosphere. But they're far from the only ones to populate the ocean. Many other species have made a place for themselves. Here we find another multicellular eukaryote, quite similar to algae, the Grypania spiralis. It's thread-like and twists itself, a bit like a whirlpool. And here's Eosphera. We've learned a lot about this spheroidal organism. From the first elements we were able to analyze, it appears that it reproduces by fission. Each new cell remains attached to the mother cell, forming a mucilaginous sheath. During the same period, we also find a type of plankton that also uses photosynthesis to survive, phytoplankton. We could stop here on the presentation of paleoprotozoic animals. Until a few years ago, it was thought that only single-celled organisms populated the world. But in 2010, a university team from Poitiers, France, discovered nearly 250 fossils in Gabon, near Franceville. And, incredible as it may seem, they date back 2.1 billion years. We could never have thought that multicellular organisms could have colonized the planet so many years ago. The oldest, those of the Ediacara fauna, which we'll talk about later, date back some 600 million years. Before the discovery of Franceville, these fossils were the oldest known traces of living organisms. Here we have representations of these complex multicellular organisms with soft gelatinous bodies. They are neither quite animals nor quite plants. In the end, we know very little about these organisms, apart from their great variety of forms. You can see lobed organisms with serrated edges, smooth-edged organisms, slender, elongated organisms, discoid organisms, or even some with an accumulation of small rounded subunits. Over the years, the animals we've met have left traces in the sediment, but their soft bodies don't fossilize. That's why it's so difficult for us to get a realistic view of these organisms. All unclassified microfossils are classified as acritarchs. The majority are probably algae of all shapes and sizes. Although they differ in appearance, they all have one thing in common: oxygen production. For many bacteria, the increase in oxygen in the atmosphere represents unprecedented chaos. But this catastrophe, while bringing them to a tragic end, also fosters the expansion of other life forms, eukaryotes. When we speak of a unified Earth and a supercontinent, we usually mean Pangea. But the continents have only linked and unlinked over billions of years. Pangea was not the first supercontinent to form. At the very beginning of the Mesoproterozoic, a supercontinent called Columbia began to break up. Over time, the supercontinent Rodinia was formed. This was a period of great geological and geographical upheaval, but it was also marked by the appearance of the first modern eukaryotes and sexual reproduction. Let's take a look at one of these specimens. Meet Bangiomorpho pubescens, a red algae. It's one of the oldest complex multicellular organisms known today. So far, we've talked a lot about how these organisms derive their energy, or about their many and varied forms. But during the Mesoproterozoic era, 1.2 billion years ago to be precise, an incredible event occurred that turned evolution on its head. Bangiamorpha pubescens was part of this revolution in life on Earth. Extensive analysis of these fossils has demonstrated the presence of differential spore and gamete formation. This means that the red algae is sexual. This new mode of reproduction not only favors genetic recombination, but also, and above all, complex multicellularity. This is one of the essential building blocks in the evolution of life on Earth. Cells join and attach to each other. This was not the only radical change to take place during this period. Parallel to this event, another revolution in the world of living beings is underway. Cells pass a new milestone. According to scientists, a genetic accident also occurred just over 1 billion years ago. When we think of a genetic accident, it's easy to think of rather dramatic consequences. But genetic accidents can also bring unexpected benefits. To understand this, we first need to know what a genetic accident is. When a cell divides to duplicate itself, it reproduces its DNA exactly. Indeed, this is how it happens in the vast majority of cases. However, it also happens that a change, sometimes minute, occurs during DNA copying. This is known as a mutation. A mutation can be fatal for an organism. It doesn't have the right codes, its functioning is disrupted, and it can't survive. But a mutation can also give rise to new abilities, unexpected and beneficial abilities. Such was the case with the genetic accident that occurred 1 billion years ago. Initially, our little unicellular bacterial organisms were equipped with a flagellum, a sort of little tail. They have a particular DNA with a specific code, notably for proteins. During duplication, the DNA has mutated. A genetic accident modified the original code of this unicellular being, giving the proteins new capacities. They can now interact with others. This phenomenon is crucial to the evolution of life and the diversity of living organisms. It is thanks to this key stage that we pass from a unicellular organism to a multicellular organism. These multicellular organisms become increasingly complex and different from one another. This is the possible birth of plants, fungi, and even animals. For the time being, jellyfish, sponges, corals, polyps, and anemones are gradually taking root at the heart of our underwater world. It's time for us to meet a handful of them in the next period. See you in the Neoproterozoic. We've reached the very last era of the Precambrian. It prepares the Earth for enormous upheavals in the living world. It heralds the imminent arrival of the Cambrian and the explosion of life on Earth. This era takes place between 1 billion and 542 million years ago. It was marked by the fragmentation of the supercontinent Rodinia. Around 800 million years ago, the Earth's landscape, as seen from the sky, was totally different from today. The Earth was a vast ocean from which a single land emerged, Rodinia. 50 million years later, the continent is gradually breaking up. Plate tectonics played its part. The continent began to fracture into two parts, giving rise to the Panthalassa Ocean. This slow division continued over the following millions of years. Like a jigsaw puzzle, it fragmented into several pieces. According to the most recent studies on the subject, it seems that the supercontinent Rodinia broke up into 8 distinct parts. As you'll see, this intense terrestrial activity is both an unprecedented shock and a veritable springboard for life to develop to its full potential. Under the effect of hotspots, the continent of Rodinia is pierced by magma spears. They cut through the Earth's crust, spewing out huge quantities of lava. The ground then began to fracture. This event was accompanied by the opening of oceans and inlets, which increased the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere, and hence rainfall. The carbon present in the rain, in the form of carbon dioxide, soon found its way back into the ocean, trapped in sediments in the form of carbonates. At the same time, the enormous lava flows produced by the Rodinia fracture formed basaltic surfaces on the surface of the continents. When eroded by moisture, these basaltic surfaces consume 8 times more carbon than the same granitic surface. Over thousands of years, atmospheric CO2, a greenhouse gas, decreases drastically. As a result, the Earth enters a new period of extreme cold. In fact, our planet has undergone not 1, but 2 periods of glaciation during this period. The first took place 760 million years ago, the second 150 million years later. The latter was one of the most intense. The first stretched from 760 million to 700 million years ago. Then, shortly afterwards, between 620 and 590 million years ago, the Earth faced a second, full-blown ice age. The warming between the interglacial periods was due to volcanism, which was very active during this period of supercontinent fragmentation, releasing large quantities of CO2 over millions of years, triggering a greenhouse effect large enough to thaw the Earth. Bits of life seem to have found refuge to survive this difficult period. Between these 2 ice ages, the first 2-sided animals appeared. Worms that resembled annelids, others priapulids. Then ice, snow, and cold returned. Our planet was nicknamed Snowball Earth. Seen from space, you probably wouldn't recognize our blue planet. Covered in ice and snow, the pack ice extended, according to studies, perhaps as far as the equator. While this line is synonymous with humid heat, dense, lush forests, incredible waterfalls, and an extraordinarily rich fauna at that time, the equator line would have been almost frozen in ice. All hope of life seemed to be extinguished. No organism could survive here. And yet, it may be that some of them did. How can we be sure? This time, it's not the remains, but technology that's giving us a little help in discovering more about our history and this complex period. Computer simulations, based on advanced calculations and complex algorithms, show the existence of refuge zones running along the equatorial line. For millions of years, organisms lived in isolation in these shelters, then, with the thaw, managed to expand their territory and adapt to a wider environment. Rock analyses show a significant reduction in carbon levels and thus in organic activity. Photosynthesis was also cut off over millions of years. Bacteria therefore suffered the full force of this glacial chaos. The ice cap could be heard hundreds of meters below the surface. At times, temperatures dropped as low as -50 degrees Celsius or -58 degrees Fahrenheit. Many bacteria did not survive, and the first algae probably also lost a significant number of specimens during this period of extreme cold. One might think that this glaciation dealt a fatal blow to the evolution and expansion of life on Earth, but it would be a mistake to stop at this preconceived idea. Life is an eternal adaptation. That's what evolution is all about. Look at this little organism. It's a trichoplax. At first glance, it doesn't look like a highly evolved creature. Barely visible to the naked eye, it looks like a large amoeba. It's a placozoan. It belongs to the group of organisms known as metazoans. Placozoans are ultimately metazoans with a particularly simple structure. Trichoplax has no head, tail, legs, or nervous system. It has no digestive tract, nor does it have extracellular digestion. One wonders how it can survive and qualify as a living organism. Yet it has a body covered with cilia, which it uses to move around. Its shape is rather unusual, and we know very little about it. But if we delve a little deeper, we might find that Trichoplax has only 4 different cell types. This confirms its place among simple organisms. And yet, this little animal, along with others of its kind, has undoubtedly played an extremely important role in evolution. This little body contains the protein genes that enable the antero-posterior, dorso-ventral axes, and even 4 of the visual pigment genes. Imagine such a simple, primitive animal is one of the keys to the evolution of living things. It's not alone in this environment, since after the ice ages, algae developed extensively and spread throughout the world's oceans. Underwater waters are becoming more vegetated. Contrary to appearances, this climatic catastrophe was a godsend. It led to a major diversification of living organisms. When the thaw starts, a whole series of chain reactions ensues. The erosion of continents as the ice melts is said to be responsible for the release of vast quantities of nutrients. This abundance of nutrients encourages the expansion and proliferation of phytoplankton. As a domino effect, or snowball effect in our case, the presence of phytoplankton has encouraged the release of oxygen into the atmosphere. This element is one of the keys to the emergence of multicellular life. It exploded in the Cambrian. But for this explosion of life to take place within a few 100 million years, there is still a long way to go in the Proterozoic. Let's explore the oceans to discover the many organisms of this period. The big problem we've had so far is that organisms were made up of soft bodies. After so many years, time has taken its toll on the traces and vestiges of the past. But by the end of the Proterozoic, fossil remains were making it possible to learn more about the flora and fauna of this pivotal period in biological evolution, thanks in particular to the discovery of the Ediacara fauna. Around 600 to 700 million years ago, organic evolution took a new turn. Cells are now divided into 2 layers. The first is the layer of inner cells, known as the endoderm. This is covered by an outer cell layer, known as the ectoderm. These new beings with 2 embryonic cell layers are known as diploblastic organisms. This term designates animals without mesoderm, with only an outer wall, a digestive wall, and organs derived from these walls. These new abilities have enabled very different animals to appear on Earth. These include the sponge family, as well as cnidarians such as jellyfish, coral, and hydra. For the first few billion years, life was only possible in an aquatic environment. Although we are fully aware of this ancient life, we can only perceive minute traces of it today. What's more, these organisms have evolved very little so far. Perhaps some chemical evolution has taken place, but again, this is impossible to determine today. The remains of the past are too vague, too abstract, to draw any real conclusions. Scientists have great difficulty differentiating between certain remains. Are they the remains of bacteria or algae? Only size can sometimes distinguish between the two. But from now on, everything changes and everything becomes possible. Earth will never again be uninhabited. Evolution is underway. Life takes on a new lease of life. Although organisms always consist of a soft body, they also have integuments, i.e. a set of external structures, an integumentary system, which protects the animal from the outside environment. Today's animals have a variety of integuments, including hair, scales, and feathers. This integumentary system is a real game changer for scientists, who can now rely on much more convincing evidence. Teguments are resistant and have enabled fossilization. Here's what these remnants of another time have revealed. The first thing we notice is that organisms begin by gaining a few centimeters. For billions of years, they remain microscopic. From now on, they'll be bigger and bigger. The rangiomorph is one of them. It's an organism that resembles a long leaf. It also has a stem connected to the seabed. Scientists have put forward a hypothesis about this evolution. They wondered why organisms grew taller. The first theory was linked to feeding, but was soon abandoned. There were plenty of nutrients around, so it's highly unlikely that this criterion had such a significant impact on evolution. If not to feed more easily, why grow? The number of small specimens grouped alongside this large rangiomorph suggests that larger size may have favored reproduction. The animals also developed a new shape. They are symmetrical animals with appendages that function in pairs. This particular shape enabled them to become burrowing animals. They feed on organic matter covering the ground. They can be tube-shaped, leaf-shaped, or sac-like. The main representative of these late Proterozoic animals are grouped together in what is known as the Ediacara fauna. It has been so named since the discovery, in 1946, of a wide variety of fossils around 560 million years old in Australia's Ediacara Hills. Since then, similar specimens have been found elsewhere in the world, including Canada, South Africa, Siberia, and Europe. Here are a few animals from the Ediacara fauna. Here, these circular animals with concentric rings are Aspidella. They measure up to 8 centimeters or 3 inches long, and 4 centimeters or 2 inches wide. A little further on, it's a Charnia. There are 3 known species of Charnia: Charnia wardi, Charnia antecedens, and Charnia masoni. The latter looks a little like a feather or leaf. The Charnia wardi genus was one of the largest, growing up to 2 meters or 7 feet. Other species resemble animals we know today: jellyfish. The jellyfish group was quite common in the oceans at the time. Cyclomedusa davidi and Cyclomedusa radiata are among them. Another animal, another form. Here's a Sphrygina. It too bears some resemblance to the fauna we know. It resembles a worm with a head, a body, and a kind of spike that allows it to anchor itself in the seabed. It probably slid through the mud to find nutrients. plants. Seaweed is also ever present. Here again, we have a lovely specimen of Bangiomorpha pubescens right in front of us, a red algae. Finally, a Dickinsonia. We know very little about it, and scientists are still finding it hard to classify. However, we do know that it was able to move, as traces of movement are attached to it. Oval in shape and measuring from a few millimeters to around 1.4 meters or 5 feet in length, it has a radiate structure. The term radiata is also used to define this criterion. This means that these organisms, invertebrates, have axial symmetry with cyclic patterns around this axis. Like most organisms in this category, Dickinsonia is also characterized by the two cell sheets we mentioned for diploblastic animals. That is, it has an endoderm and an ectoderm. These two layers are separated by an acellular gel. There's another rather unusual feature of this animal. A single orifice serves as both mouth and anus. This is the very beginning of evolution, and differentiated organs are not yet in vogue. Summing up the main stages of biological evolution in a few lines, it all really began 3.9 billion years ago. It's possible that this event occurred earlier, but there are no remains to confirm this. At that time, the largest living creatures were only 1/10 of a millimeter in size and were limited to the kingdom of bacteria. Nearly 1 billion years later, around 2.8 billion years ago, the cellular world evolved, leaving a small space for eukaryotes, organisms with a nucleus. They are capable of symbiosis with proteobacteria. They draw their energy from substances supplied by the Earth. A few 100 million years later, around 2.1 billion years ago, a new type of eukaryote appeared, more complex and elaborate. This time, these cyanobacteria took advantage of photosynthesis and drew their energy from the sun. By the end of the Proterozoic, more varied forms of organisms had become part of the cycle of life. They were able to move, were sexually mature, and diploblastic. Underwater riches are flourishing. Yet 542 million years ago, all these organisms disappeared. We don't know what caused this mass extinction. No meteorite, no volcano, no major glaciation was responsible for the disappearance of all the primitive forms of the Precambrian. But it is sometimes in the midst of chaos that positive things can happen. Remember, glaciation allowed eukaryotes to evolve. This widespread extinction, in turn, gave way to the Cambrian explosion. This is one of the greatest stages in biological evolution. It makes a new turning point for the living world and for our planet. Most of today's major metazoan phyla will emerge. It's a veritable zoological Big Bang. Animal, plant, and bacterial species are about to emerge. The only thing that Precambrian and Cambrian species have in common is that they too will be born in the ocean.